Hello friends, and welcome to another Zelda discussion video, what has kind of become about a twice a year tradition on the channel at this point, wherein I sit down with other content creators and we discuss the current state of affairs and our feelings about the most recent game, and, the state of the house as it were. Today I've gathered a handful of content creators and Zelda fans to discuss all things Echoes of Wisdom. We will end up getting into spoiler territory. We try to give spoiler warnings before dropping anything too important, although at one point much later in the video we do end up just straight up discussing the end of the game. So some things to keep in mind there. Of course, there are links in the description to everybody's own channels here, so I would encourage you to go and check out all of these awesome content creators. With all of that said, let's hop into the discussion, starting with a round of introductions. My name is Daniel, I'm Capt Bergerson, and I'll be hosting and moderating today's discussion.
Oh, hi, I'm CM30. I run Game Reinvented. I've posted about Echoes of Wisdom recently, although I mostly focus on games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And I'm happy to discuss Echoes of Wisdom today, having just beat it 100% complete.
I'm Hyrule Gamer, also known as Adam. I've been making Zelda theory, lore, mystery discussions, everything Zelda for a good, 7 or 8 years now. And yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing this latest game.
Hey guys, I'm Kokiri Theory, but you can call me KT for short. I'm relatively new to the Zeldatubes scene. I started right before Tears of the Kingdom came out, and as you can guess from my name, I'm big on Zelda theories and love to dig in on lore and all that fun stuff. And super excited to talk to you guys today.
Hey everybody, Little Bean Green, LBG, Bean Boy, whatever. I am also relatively new to the Zelda game for about 8 months now, and I'll cover just about anything lore, gameplay, themes between and within games, and how they connect to stories in our real world. This is the first game that I've been a part of the Zeldatube for, and so it's exciting to be able to discuss it here with some other people.
Hi, I'm Nehru. I'm kind of a Zelda-tuber. I only really release a video once every 6 months apparently, but that's alright. I'm currently working on my 3-hour video essay about how Twilight Princess Picross is better than Twilight Princess.
Hello, I'm Swack. I'm also relatively new to the Zelda scene. I make weekly video essays about Zelda, from long-form stuff to short-form stuff, basically all in the name of critiquing the series and digging into the philosophy behind it and learning to love it despite its flaws and figuring out how to improve the series as we go forward from a consumer's perspective.
Ahoy, I'm Triss, also known as Toon Triss. In terms of making content specifically for Zelda, I've been doing it for years on other channels, but for my own endeavors now, I'm new to trying to come up with theories and everything for Zelda, so with Echoes of Wisdom being the first one I'm trying to dive into that stuff with. I'm looking forward to talking about the game.
Let's get into it. Our first topic is going to be a spoiler-free section, just to give everyone a heads up. General spoiler-free thoughts, feelings about the game in general. I think what we'll do, just to mix it up, instead of just doing the same order over again, we'll do it backwards for this first topic. So we'll start with Triss and work our way back.
I think what's really fascinating about Echoes of Wisdom to me is I was really unsure how to feel about it at first, like when it was announced and the lead up to it. Like, this was a very short span of announcement to release for a mainline Zelda game. So it all kind of hit me really, really quickly in like the month leading up to the game of, oh my god, we're getting a new Zelda. Then, the game actually coming out and riding through that feeling, the excitement of every little thing to do in the game and comparing it to other Zeldas, and that feeling we all know very well of when you're playing through a new Zelda game for the first time. There's nothing quite like it, but I think what's resonated with me so well with Echoes of Wisdom is I'm still hearing of like new ways people solved things in the game, and I think that's so cool, and it's in a different way than it was with Tears of the Kingdom, so it's making a similar yet also very different impact with me and everyone I talk to, and I think that's really cool.
My general thoughts on it are just, it blew me out of the water because it got announced at a point in time where I was slowly sloping off of the Zelda series, and after Tears of the Kingdom came out and I loved it to death, flash forward and it's come out like a year ago, and I kind of start trying to return to it and I'm just not having as much fun. And a lot of the cracks are kind of starting to show for me personally in a game which I really loved the experience of in the beginning. So after that, I kind of started falling into other games and kind of started believing that I wouldn't be a Zelda fan for the rest of my life, and I would no longer, try to make Zelda content. Then Echoes came out, or was announced, and I was skeptical because I saw it was using Link's Awakening's engine, and I had gotten kind of cynical towards Nintendo, and I was like, oh, they're gonna reuse the old engine, and they're gonna make like a cheap kind of cash grab type of game. And then it came out, and I played it, and it is, in my mind, a testament to everything that The Legend of Zelda is, and a celebration of all that's come before and everything that they have yet to do, as it took so many elements from the open air titles and merged them with elements from the legacy titles, and had this kind of combination of traditional and new that just reignited this love and desire for this series, and kind of a faith in Nintendo that they still know what makes Zelda good, and they still love the series that I used to love, which kind of made it my favorite Zelda game since Breath of the Wild came out, and I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
Wow, right on. That's one of those things where I think like being proven wrong, but in a pleasantly surprised way, can be like rewarding.
Absolutely, because now you can look back and remember why you love the series in the first place.
That's a journey. I love that.
I think that Echoes of Wisdom is remarkable. I'm looking at my personal list here. It would be my 4th favorite top-down Zelda game of all time. Only the Oracle games and Link's Awakening are above it.
Good taste.
One of the things that I have really enjoyed about Echoes of Wisdom is watching people, like Zwack and some of our other friends who are very deeply skeptical of the game sort of fall in love with it over the period of marketing, and are now having a really great time with it, and we get to sort of just watch from afar. And it's pretty easy to see why, right? Like, you look at the game for even 2 seconds and you can see all the love and attention that was put into it. I went into the game with pretty high expectations, and I'm still leaving it more impressed than I thought I would be. It's really remarkable how they took seemingly so much criticism that was applied to Tears of the Kingdom and applied it to Echoes of Wisdom. I'm sure this is probably something we're going to talk about later, but I know a lot of people were worried that the bed echo was going to end up in the same situation as the air bike with Tears of the Kingdom, where you're just going to solve every puzzle with the bed. But they thought of that, and it's like the bed is incorporated into the puzzles, so that's not really something that you can do that often. And it's like every single worry that I had about the game, and that most people had about the game, it's like they knew what we were thinking and they countered it, and that's something that I've consistently experienced the entire time. It's such a love letter to the series as a whole. It's so nice seeing so many enemies that we haven't seen for so long come back. The ecosystem is fantastic. The story is charming. Playing as Zelda is excellent. Yeah, I think it's really, really, really wonderful. I'm currently writing a review for it for bossrush.net. I'm gonna show them here, and I'm gonna give it a 4.5 out of 5. The only thing keeping me from giving it a 5 out of 5 is just that it doesn't have that layer of story that I connect with quite in the same way as a game like Link's Awakening does. But from a gameplay perspective and a world design perspective, it's just as good as the games above it, I think.
That's fair. And I think my own feelings are fairly close to yours. Even a concern I had, which was a carryover from Tears, going into the game, I felt like, oh, there's gonna be so many of these echoes, I'm gonna lose track of what's actually what, what is what, and what's useful for what. Because typically a Zelda game, you'll have a handful of maybe 20 items, and that's way easier to keep track of than 127 echoes. And I never found myself having that problem. I felt like despite the sheer volume of echoes, pretty much all of them, aside from some that were clearly just an upgraded version of another thing, like an upgraded monster, almost every item in it was distinct and useful and not redundant. And I found that to be just a pleasant surprise, I guess. So,
except for the spear throwing moblins who aren't useful at all.
Yes. It's because they wait too long to actually throw the damn thing. But
I would say generally the word that kept coming to my mind as I was playing it was just a surprise. Because as someone who was probably too hyped for Tears of the Kingdom and disappointed by it, and then with some of the comments that Aonuma had made in the past about grass is greener on the other side and wanting the classic versions of things back, and we're never going back to that, the open air is the future of the series, and then to be playing the game and you come to a certain point and you say, oh, they made this choice. Oh, and I recognize that choice from old games. Oh, and I like it. Oh, and it fits kind of with this new sense of freedom. So to me, it was just, I feel like my eyebrows were raising every so often, just like, oh, that was a good choice you made. This is what we've been saying to you, Nintendo. A lot of people have given Nintendo credit, and I think they deserve it for the game they put out. But I also think there's probably a lot of credit that goes to Grezzo as well. I think in one of those interviews, they said something that a bunch of the people that were on the team, on the development team, were fans of the series. I don't know how much of what is from whom, but I feel like a lot of the callbacks, a lot of those Easter eggs, a lot of the penning of that love letter is Grezzo. But I might just be making that up. But all in all, I definitely had a great experience with it. It was not what I was expecting, and I'm glad, because I think it's a step in the right direction for the series. And I think for a lot of people, it was what we were asking for, where we weren't asking for one or the other. We were asking for an experiment with them both. And I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's the perfect blend of both things, but I definitely think it's an experiment that needed to happen, and one I'm glad Nintendo and Grezzo did.
I was actually thinking that, and then you brought it up about Grezzo and their involvement in the game, and obviously they have a history of remastering many previous Zelda titles with mixed results. I think they did a bang-up job with Link's Awakening. I have maybe harsher views about what they did with Majora's Mask. Clearly, like the people who worked on it and their love for the series really does come through clear, and I think that is definitely an important thing to highlight, sort of the passion of the people that work on these games. Absolutely.
Pretty much anyone who knows me knows that playable Princess Zelda has been a dream of mine since I was a kid. You know, the reason I got on YouTube in the first place was because I wanted to drop my playable Zelda conspiracy theories for Tears of the Kingdom in a public place for some reason. And also my mom, who does not keep up with video game news, texted me when the first trailer dropped, like freaking out on my behalf. So, you know, obviously having that come true was very exciting for me. But yeah, man, it's just so fun and surprising in terms of the mechanics and the puzzles and freedom of play in the game. It just feels like it takes the best of a lot of different Zelda games and just really has something for everyone, kind of crossing that Venn diagram of freedom and kind of more structured play. But yeah, it's just so fun, and I love that I could theoretically just play it through again and again, doing dungeons in different ways. But yeah, like others said, you know, a delightful surprise. Did not expect this coming out this year, and it came out so quickly and so suddenly, and it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. The fact that the announcement to release cycle was so short, that would not have been on my bingo card if I had a bingo card. Also, that's so cute about your mom. That's adorable. I love that.
And I was like, where did you hear this? What? It was so funny. Anyway, mom news sources were on it, I guess.
I think I'm going to repeat what a lot of people have said, that I was kind of pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed it. And it also felt like it crept up really quick out of nowhere. I almost not forgot about the game coming out, but it wasn't as looming as Tears of the Kingdom was. Like, I felt that game was looming for so long that you just couldn't avoid the fact that it was coming out. But with this one, I felt a lot more relaxed with it coming up, and it wasn't until the week of release that I really started thinking about it. Yeah, I was a little bit unsure going in, just because, not because the game looked bad or anything from trailers, it was just for the past, 7 years or something like that, or maybe even more than that, with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, it was just such a different type of game. So I was a little bit unsure about how it'd be received, but I was very pleasantly surprised.
To be honest, when it was announced, I was a bit skeptical of it at first. I was like, do I buy this given that we've got Mario & Luigi Brothership coming out, Mario Party Jamboree, etc.? And I was looking back and forth, thinking, do I buy it? Do I not buy it? I took a chance on it. Thought Superform Ruins was a bit slow, but then once it opened up, I was like, wow, it's a really good game with a lot of cool ideas. I thought there was a lot more depth in the ecosystem once the world opened up and the dungeons got more complicated. So eventually, when the puzzles started getting more complex and you start thinking, oh, these echoes could be solved this way or this way, that kind of made a lot more of it. And I feel like it was also helped quite a bit by the fact the story took more twists and turns after that point. The various new towns were probably more interesting, and they kind of took a lot of things from Tears of the Kingdom and fixed them.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people don't give Nintendo maybe enough credit for, especially the Zelda team, for sort of pivoting to fan feedback. I know there's this perception about Nintendo being a very staunch company that just puts their head down and says fingers in their ears and says, no, we're doing it our way. But I have found historically, you can look back and see a trend of the game comes out and people have things to say about it, and Nintendo kind of actually having an ear to the ground and listening. So it's like there does feel like a lot of things were a lot of the popular sentiment around Tears of the Kingdom, whether you agree with it or not, it does seem like that was heard at least. And so
I feel like Nintendo in the Switch era has kind of made a lot of changes to try to listen to fan feedback more than ever. Like, I mean, you got to say Mario Odyssey, they've gone back to 64 style after a lot of people asked for it after stuff like 3D Land and World. And then they went back open air with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which then each one tried to add in more traditional Zelda tropes as well as the new stuff. Luigi's Mansion 3 brought back the boss ghosts and more open structure. Mario Party seems to be trying to go back to the old style. Kirby series went 3D. Owly and Wonder seem to move away from the new Super Mario Bros. Art style as well. So it's like they've listened to a lot of bad feedback for some of their older games, like this generation, which could do everything what people want.
I definitely think a big part of that might be, there's a lot of the newer developers at Nintendo that have a say or able to get any sort of say in are the people that are nostalgic for the same era of Nintendo that we are.
I think a lot of it comes from people who joined, and there's nothing wrong with this, but a lot of people who joined the fandom with the Breath of the Wild games, and they're not used to the fact that Aonuma just likes to yap sometimes, and you shouldn't really take anything he says too seriously. Like, people are always going on and on about his interviews and how it spells doom for the rest of the franchise, right? But like, this is the same guy who said we're never getting a Skyward Sword HD sequel or port, and this is the same guy that said motion controls were the future of Zelda, right? Like, I think that Aonuma just gets really high on the current gimmick that Zelda's doing, and then when he comes down from that high, he sees reason and continues making the fantastic games that he's made through his entire career, right? And now in his role as a producer, he's going to be producing fantastic games. But when you're a game director, you're kind of only as good as your last game, and so when he releases a stinker, as some people think Tears of the Kingdom is, they end up being pretty hard on him. But like, I don't know, I think it's just some people are a little too harsh on the man. He just likes to talk.
I mean,
So what you're saying is he is the Zelda cycle.
in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
He's in his own Zelda cycle.
Every person who creates stuff, even us on like the YouTube level, you're gonna have some great pieces of work and you're gonna have some things that you're less satisfied with, and it's just gonna happen. And I know I certainly go through a similar cycle of feeling like every video I put out is my best work ever, and then a little while later looking back on it and being like, wow, that video was kind of bad actually, but this thing I'm working on is actually good.
It also seems like, too, Nintendo, or at least the Zelda team in the past, has had a history of listening to feedback, but honing in on a part of it and then taking it way too far in the next installment. And it feels like this one, they honed in and they listened, but they listened better. And they didn't just hear feedback, but they then didn't overcorrect it.
Yeah, it does feel very well-tuned in that game, I guess is a good way to put it.
I think the Wii U probably had an effect as well, to be honest. Let's be honest there. Like, after the console kind of didn't sell quite as well, I think Nintendo went back to drawing board a lot with their franchises and were like, what do we need to do to make people care about them again?
Well, I still love the Wii U, but yeah, that is absolutely fair. Someone brought up that there's a lot of the newer, sort of new blood in the development teams of Nintendo. One of Nintendo's biggest franchises right now in Splatoon really came about from exactly that, just like one of these sort of the new blood sort of putting forward their work and trying something new. And I think the success of that series has kind of shown Nintendo that like some of the old guard needs to, not step down necessarily, but like oversee and nurture new talent as well. And I think you can see kind of a shift in those mindsets happening.
Wasn't there some names in like this game and I think of the previous games where you see like new directors coming in and again more of a role?
That's a good point. I do not remember her name, but I know that the director was the first. It's her first game that she directed, and she's also the first woman to direct a Zelda game, which is awesome to see. That's too bad that it took this long, but yeah, actually, you know what? I feel like I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't look up what her name is, because I feel bad.
Tomomi Sano.
Thank you.
I also think I saw that this was the first Zelda game that Miyamoto wasn't credited on at all, which is pretty interesting. That he's more hands-off now.
That is interesting. I guess he's busy doing movies and theme parks and Pikmin mobile games, but...
And to his credit, really good museums, really good theme parks, and really good movies.
Yes, absolutely.
He's found his niche. Can I tell a quick story about the release date?
Yes, please do.
Sorry about the announcement, not the release date. So when when Echoes of Wisdom got its announcement during that Nintendo Direct, it was actually the day that I was graduating from university, and I was heading to my convocation in my graduation outfit, like in my cap and gown, watching the Nintendo Direct in the car. And then the new Zelda trailer came out, obviously, and so I was freaking out in the car. And then, much like KT, I've been wanting playable Zelda for a very, very long time. I made a whole video about it. So when I saw that it was playable Zelda, I freaked out even more. And so now that's my mom's memory of me on my graduation, freaking out about Zelda in my cap and gown in the car.
I love that. Also, congrats on your graduation.
Thank you.
People who are familiar with the channel absolutely saw this topic of conversation coming, but dungeons. I've got to talk about dungeons. The Dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom sort of, I felt were a step in the right direction. There's a lot of mixed feelings about them. And as was alluded to already, this game, Echoes of Wisdom, seems to sort of take a lot of old and new and combine those and blend in a very nice way. And I think that extends pretty well to the dungeons of the game. How are we feeling about the dungeons? How would we rank them just in general against other games' dungeons? Just how do you think they feel just on their own? And if there's one that's your favorite, let me know what that one is as well. And we'll just shake up the order again. I'll go with Adam to start.
Oh man, I was so nervous there thinking you were gonna pick me, and you did.
You heard my thoughts.
Yeah, I was on the same level. Yeah, dungeons in this game are honestly probably my favorite thing about it, and that's mostly down to the puzzles in them. I just thought they were so good, to be honest. I was taken back by how much I enjoyed them, especially after Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. I didn't not like them. I just felt a lot of the time the puzzles in those games, they felt a little bit more like just a process to progress. Whereas in this game, it reminded me a lot more of how puzzles felt, or sorry, dungeons in general felt in older games, where it felt like more of a challenge and more of an actual thinking process rather than just doing a sort of straightforward task to progress. I just thought the dungeons were brilliant. They were really clever. I love the themes around them. That was a big part of it. Comparing them to other games, I'm not sure, because I kind of felt like just the way you sort of traverse them and get through them with all the echoes and the bind, it kind of felt like its own thing to me in a way. I've not really had the time to process comparing them yet. Yeah, they were just so good. And like, I honestly really want to go back and play more, even just playing through them again, because after seeing how I did some of the things, whether it was puzzles or enemies or even boss fights, I then later seen other people's footage and I was like, oh, you've done that a completely different way to me. And that's one of the things I really love about them, how much, I guess, creativity you can use. You could think of one idea, whether someone else could think of a completely different idea, and they're both totally valid. They both totally work.
Absolutely, yeah.
I could ramble all day about this, so I'm gonna have to pass the torch. But yeah, they're brilliant. They're definitely some of my favorite dungeons in the series. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Deku one, or the Pharaoh region one, that one's my favorite for sure.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have the correct opinion.
I don't know. The ice dungeon was my favorite, but
that would be my second favorite.
That's fair. I did think a point you brought up about sort of like different ways to do things, like variety of methods to solve puzzles and stuff like that. Even between like two playthroughs of mine, where I did the dungeons in a slightly different order, because I think there's an overall structure of like a first act of the game and a second act of the game, but then there's also some flexibility with the dungeon order between those acts, similar to A Link Between Worlds. But I felt like even just altering the dungeon order in those acts, like in the first time I played through, I did the Gerudo dungeon first, and then I did the Zora one. And then in my second playthrough that I'm streaming, I did the Zora one first. And I was finding myself like, oh, I don't have this and this in my Echo roster, so I can't do these things the same way I did it the first time. And having to rethink all of my strategies was really interesting to do. So yeah, I think that's a great point. But it's one that makes revisiting the game really interesting, I think. So I'm definitely gonna have to try out all sorts of dungeon orders to see how that changes sort of the methods. Yeah. Bean Green, my friend, you're up next. I call upon thee.
And I answer. I think generally was very positive about the dungeons. I liked that they were mandatory. I liked that they were their own thing. They were restricted enough that you couldn't just ascend through the ceiling, even though that's not a thing, or the floor. But yes, I did want a little more from them, and I want to not be too caught up in the fact that dungeons are back. I think, like Adam said, I'm just happy they were there. But looking back at them, so I wanted them to push me a little farther with some of the puzzles they had and some of the mechanics they had in them, and I could get into that a little more after everybody goes through. And I do have a puzzle-related question for everybody, too, to see how they solve something that soured me on one of the dungeons. But generally, I liked them. I think they're not the best in the series. It's hard to compare them to the 3D games just because I think the 3D games have something going for them with that extra dimension. I did think it was interesting that they were, I don't know if this is a spoiler, heavy on the 2D aspect, and how that sort of changed your thinking about how you used your echoes. But yeah, I'm just glad dungeons are back. I'm glad there are chests with keys in them that you can put into doors that will unlock. And I like that they try to do some new things with how you interact with the dungeons, especially in Jabul Ruins and the Farron Temple, where you don't just walk in and do the thing, something happens, and you sort of have to adjust how you approach the structure of the dungeon. But I also think Farron Wetlands and the Farron Ruins, that was my favorite one. I have a predilection for all wetland-related things anyway, and I saved that one for last just because I was hoping it would be as good as I was hoping it would be, and it was. So...
I just love that whole like section of the map, the Deku's. I just love to see the Deku scrubs back, because I think Four Swords Adventures was probably last time we saw them, and that's way too long.
Absolutely. I love them. They're such jerks. I'll keep this brief because I have so many thoughts. So many that I took a calculator and I had to calculate the median quality of the dungeons, judging from all of my individual rankings.
Whoa, okay. This is more in depth than I expected. All right.
Granted, I'm not as good at dungeon design, more my opinion, but my general opinion was that in all, it came out to 7 out of 10 for me. Similarly, I was a little disappointed at times from the game not pushing me as far as I wanted it to, and, providing some puzzles that at times could feel like you're like gliding right through them and just kind of cruising through on autopilot. But those really didn't mean much to me in the face of the fact that I found that a good amount of the dungeons were so like investingly unique and were traditional Zelda dungeons, like, the closest we've seen to it in 7 years. But at the same time, they committed to what they want it to be. My favorite is the Farron Temple because it's so winding and labyrinthian, and there's this level of like you're already in it for 30 minutes and you haven't uncovered half the map, and you're just like, this is exactly what I want. This is like, I love the Water Temple, so this is precisely what I want again. But even things that were a little less traditional, like the Water Temple, where while retaining player freedom, there was this almost interesting like linearity to it, where, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, describing a mechanic in it, but where you had like 4 different corners, and I'll be vague, and you can choose whatever order you want to do this corners in, but they all lead to one specific thing in the middle of the dungeon, and it's not like you're winding in and out of the dungeon, you're just in there and back and in there and back. And I thought I would find that annoying, but I found that just so charming because it was kind of unapologetically trying to be itself and trying to adapt the existing dungeon format into something that's like, a little bit more linear, but not in a bad way. And I just loved embracing that aspect. And, there's certain other dungeons where there's this element of kind of being inside the dungeon and then going outside of it, almost like the Desert Palace in A Link to the Past, where you're going onto the exterior to find another way into a different room in the interior. I have my own gripes with them, and I don't think they're perfect. I don't think that they're the paragon idea of what a Zelda dungeon should be, but for everything that they try to be, I'm just like so charmed by them and so happy that dungeons feel like they're trying to be something that they want to be again, if that makes sense. I have a kind of disproportionately high opinion on the Divine Beasts compared to how I used to think of them, honestly, because of how unique they were. And a hard thing for me with Tears of the Kingdom is that their dungeons, in my experience, felt like the Divine Beasts without being able to like move the creature. And that's what made me kind of not love them as much, because they were not really being unapologetically themselves and ambitious. And that's exactly what I got out of Echoes.
I did feel like every dungeon really had something different to offer from every other dungeon in this game. Like you mentioned the Zora, I think it's Jabul Ruins, and that one feels very Divine Beast to me. Like those could have been terminals to activate, but it's the only dungeon that's like that in this game. And I think that's part of what makes it not feel like a concept that's wearing thin. And then there's even a couple of like optional dungeons aside from like the main set of story dungeons, that like mini dungeons out there in the world. But those were really cool to see, like this whole little optional thing that has like a little boss at the end, in addition to the core set of dungeons. So I thought that was really cool, but none of them felt like the other. And that it was something that I feel like was a big complaint with Breath of the Wild's Divine Beast, was that they start to kind of blend together.
Yeah, when I saw the Jabal Ruins screenshot before, I was a bit like, oh god, they're doing the terminal thing again, to be honest. And then when I played it, I was like, thank god they're not doing that again. There's only just one dungeon set up they can skip anyway. Either way, I feel like dungeons are pretty good in this game. I feel like a lot more complex than they were in the last two games. I like the return of keys and the mini bosses and whole find the map aspect, and just the fact that you can actually get lost for once again, because in the last couple of games they're just so small and so compact that there's really nowhere to get lost, nowhere to wander off to, nowhere to take an alternate route. It's just find a few things, a big room or something like that, which feels a bit disappointing. Whereas here it felt like there's a lot more choice where to go, and there's a lot more room for puzzles. I will say that, like a lot of the Zelda games, I feel like the game's 2-act structure means that the second half of the game's dungeons are a lot better than the first halves. Mm-hmm. So I loved like the Pharaoh Temple, I loved like the Ice Temple and the Elden Temple a lot more, and stuff like the Soothorn Ruins or Gerudo Sanctum, because they felt a lot more engaging, a lot more interesting layout wise. Whereas I feel like the early ones kind of just, well, they were a bit too short at times, to be honest. Like the Jabal Ruins one being, you could basically skip up the wall and skip 90% of it. I did.
Yeah.
I did also quite like the side stuff as well, like the sunken ship, that lava cave, and the two ruins. I think Smog returning. That was a cool concept to see. To be fair, the idea of all these bosses in general seems pretty good. I mean, they've certainly taken the Tears of Kingdom route to make the bosses unique again for each dungeon, and to make each of them feel like a completely different battle to a previous one. And the fact that they just came up with like 3 or 4 bosses you never encounter outside the side quest is just kind of incredible to me, to be honest.
We were talking before about like kind of old meets new. It was funny seeing like the first boss come out and its name comes up and you're like, oh, it's a Talus. Like that's a Wild Era boss through and through. But it was still somehow adapted to be like a classic Zelda boss at the same time. And so it was like this kind of perfect marriage of ideas.
I'm just not the biggest fan of top-down or side-scrolling puzzles, which is a take that maybe will get me kicked out of the chat. I don't know.
Yep.
But I loved these for the most part. Yeah. I know it's a controversial take, but yeah, I liked how there were so many ways to solve each puzzle, but there are restraints, which was great. You know, there were only a few times I was doing something and I was like, there's no way this is gonna work. It was also interesting, like when I was in the water temple, I realized the restraints were pretty weak and I could skip to the top super easily, but I found myself not wanting to because I didn't want to miss the puzzles, and I found myself going the extra mile for, you know, the hidden treasure chests and that kind of thing just because it was fun. So that was unexpected for me. And I'll say, I think my favorite dungeon was the ice dungeon. I think that's the one where I had the most light bulb moments of, you know, oh, that's how that works, that kind of thing. Love the ice dungeon. Fire dungeon is where I think I struggled the most, but it's not the dungeon's fault necessarily. I was traveling for like the week after release and was using like terrible drifty Joy-Cons, which added just like another level of fun to fire damage. So I was trying to cross the lava in a very precise way and just kept drifting off of my rocks every 5 seconds, which was so fun. So maybe I'll give the Fire Temple another chance, you know, when I have regular controllers at my disposal. And yeah, my other thought on dungeons was there was one point where I gave up on something and just Googled it, and the guide was like, use the plat booms. And I was like, well, I don't have that yet. And I had to come up with another solution, and that was fun, and I liked my solution better. So at that point, I decided I'm going to cut off plat booms because it just seemed too easy for so many of the puzzles. So it's neat that you can give yourself restraints if you want more difficulty. I know some folks were saying that you want to have the dungeons push you a little bit more, and I think that it's kind of like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. It can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be, depending on what echoes you choose to or to not use. So yeah, overall, big fan.
Can I say the Fire Temple or Elden Temple? That's like my favorite dungeon theme in the game as far as dungeon music goes. For the most part, I found like a lot of it was like kind of chill, but like good music. But that one stood out to me. The other day I was writing a script and I just literally for hours had just that song on loop because it's so good.
And I remember hearing it and then thinking, like, where did this come from?
Right. It's so good.
This is incredible.
I'm a big fan of dungeons just having very good music in general, I guess, but that one was standout, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to say, just sort of replying to a comment earlier that I somewhat agree with, but it was the idea that the earlier dungeons were too easy and that the dungeons don't like shape up to like the 3D dungeons. I do agree that the earlier dungeons are easy, but I think that's just kind of always the case in Legend of Zelda games. Like if you were to take like Dodongo Cavern and compare it to any of the adult dungeons, it's not even a comparison, right? Like I can get Dodongo Cavern done in about 30 minutes at this point, whereas, you know, the Fire Temple still takes me an hour or two. I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that the 3D dungeons are at a different level. I just think it's an opinion-based thing. I think that the 3D dungeons mostly get by on spectacle because I find most of the 3D dungeons to be kind of baby mode in terms of actual puzzles and difficulty to navigate. And I'm not a particularly smart guy. I'm pretty dumb when it comes to puzzle games, but like only one or two instances in the entire series can I think of a 3D dungeon that actually stopped me in my tracks, whereas with the 2D games I actually find pretty consistently that I get stuck. Unfortunately, that is a disagreement I agree with, or sorry, it's a criticism I agree with, that I wish there was another level that Echoes of Wisdom's dungeons were taking. I think they're all fantastic and I really enjoyed them, but nothing in this game stumped me the way that Eagle Tower and Link's Awakening did, or Jabu Jabu and Oracle of Ages, and I wish that that extra little level would have been taken. I don't know if that was just impossible with the Echoes, but I don't think so, and that's because I do really think that the game improved hugely over the Tears of the Kingdom, even Breath of the Wild design philosophy, where you're trying to navigate having a dungeon that's difficult with having so much player freedom. The reason I think that especially Tears of the Kingdom but also Breath of the Wild struggled is because there's like a difference in design philosophy between the dungeons. With Tears of the Kingdom, and as the dungeon connoisseur, Captain, you can tell me if you agree with this or not.
All right.
But to me, with Tears of the Kingdom especially, it seems like the dungeons are designed with a problem to solve and no set solution, and as a result you can kind of solve it however you want, and that results in the puzzles generally not being very difficult. Whereas with Echoes of Wisdom, it seems like they designed a set solution in mind, generally with a specific echo they want you to use, and then if you can find another solution, that's great, but they're not designing it for you to find that solution, they're designing it for the solution they have in mind. And I think that's allowed the puzzles to be a lot more challenging and in-depth than we got in the open air games, because they're not so worried about making sure the players can solve every puzzle from every possible angle, because we do have something of a dungeon and echo order in this game. Visually, I think the dungeons are the best the 2D games have ever looked. The Pharaon dungeon, the way that it used lights, blew me away.
I did really like that too. Just the darkness. Yeah, go on, sorry.
No worries. It was gorgeous. Like before this, it was A Link Between Worlds that I thought had the best looking 2D dungeons. I thought Link's Awakening remake dungeons looked great, but not as good as the dungeons in A Link Between Worlds, and it honestly kind of surprised me that the same engine was capable of how good these dungeons looked. It blew me away a little bit. I agree that the dungeon music was not exactly a high point, which is always a little disappointing because that's something the Zelda games are always known for, right? I feel like they're just kind of finding their footing again after sort of not having to make too much music, like too much dungeon tracks for the previous games and overworld tracks and stuff like that. So I feel like they're just kind of finding their footing again there. But I do agree that the music was underwhelming a little bit, with a couple exceptions. But yeah, overall, I thought the dungeons were really great. I just do also wish they would have taken that next level up. But as they were in the game, I think they were fantastic. My favorite was Pharaon. I love Deku Scrub, so it's hard for me not to love that dungeon. But also I love dungeons, as mentioned earlier, where you weave in and out of the dungeon, finding different entrances and stuff. It reminded me a lot of Skull Woods in A Link to the Past, which is my favorite dungeon in that game too. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic, and the dungeon bosses were great. I thought they were really fun.
These dungeons were really interesting to me because it's not just, finally going back to, the lock and key, the boss key, and, treasure chest that we all know and love after years of not having it. But it's also the case of, like others have said, to echo their thoughts. Really the idea of there's no dungeon items. You're not getting halfway through the dungeon, getting the exact item you need to then solve everything else going forward. There's a couple instances where you get sort of the right thing for, like, the sword fighter form, for example, that unlocks a little bit more for what you can do. But if you already have the right echoes, you could also kind of solve it that way. And I really liked how this presented the same kind of puzzles we would see in traditional 2D Zeldas, but left it open to how you wish to solve it. I think every single problem in this game has multiple solutions, and that especially goes for a lot of the ones you find in the dungeons. And I think it's really well designed in that case, because for so many years with Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, we were worried that we wouldn't be able to have that style of Zelda dungeons again that we all know and love, combined in a way that gives the players that sort of freedom that we're used to nowadays. So this blended those two together in such an interesting way that basically every echo is some sort of item depending on how you look to use it, and therefore every echo could be a proper puzzle solution. And Farron was fantastic. That also was my favorite, but the ice dungeon is like a really close second. Reaching both of those dungeons were a lot of fun, and actively trying to work through them, the way they're designed, with Farron, the way you're constantly going in and out and finding the different entrances, it makes it feel like a traditional Zelda dungeon while also feeling a lot more open than what we're used to. Just the way it blends lots of options with familiarity is what made them so fun. I completely agree with what others have said of how these feel like some of the best, at least designed or visually too, of the 2D Zelda dungeons, the top-down Zelda dungeons that we've had. And while there were definitely moments where I felt a bit stumped on what to do in certain dungeons, it was always satisfying to actually solve them. I think one small exception, but I'll wait for when we get to a different topic later on for that.
Oh, now you've got me curious. An interesting point that got brought up earlier was about the side-scrolling sections. I can't remember who exactly brought that up, but I will say I'm sure a lot of people watching have seen my videos on Link's Awakening, or even when I was like streaming the Oracle games recently and stuff. I tend to like dislike those in general in other 2D Zelda games. I find that they kind of tend to make the map layout feel like weirdly disjointed. But then I actually found myself really enjoying them in this game, and I think it's because a clear distinction between like what Link's Awakening did with those side-scrolling sections was it would often just be used to bridge to rooms that weren't actually connected on the map from a bird's eye view. Whereas in this game, it felt like just more integrated into the design overall. Like portions of the dungeon would just be side-scrolling rooms like any other room, and there would even be connecting lines on the map to indicate that. And because I guess they just felt more deliberately designed instead of kind of a band-aid solution to bridge areas, I ended up finding myself like, oh, I'm actually having quite a lot of fun with these. Even like there's a whole little almost Metroid-like escape sequence in one dungeon that's in a side-scrolling section. And this was almost like taking the same concept but putting a spin on it that changed it into something that I was expecting to dislike and then being pleasantly surprised with. So was it LBG that said he had a question for everyone after everyone had to go, or was that someone else?
Yeah, I was watching a stream and because I was going to see how this person figured this room out, and it was one of the rooms in the Nehru Temple where I'm gonna spoil some part of it. The ground becomes unfrozen. There's a key on the left hand side in the water, and there are two flames blowing out of the wall on the right hand side, and both me and this other person built something, got hit by it, and in our invincibility frames just jumped up to the platform and went through. And when I was trying to figure it out when that happened, I was just like, oh man. So I don't know if anybody else experienced that or if they did it, I guess, quote unquote, the right way, but
I think I did the same thing with the invincibility frames. You said that. As soon as you mentioned that, I realized exactly what room you were talking about.
Yeah, this does not stick out in my head at all. I'm guessing I probably like built something to like block the flames or something, but I do not remember.
All I'll say is the flames are at the top, so there's two and they're at the ceiling, and then beneath you is water, and they give you two boulders, but I don't know if you have enough to build. It doesn't matter, but anyway. So that's like early on in that dungeon, and I was just when that happened, I was kind of like, oh man, come on, don't let me do that.
I guess that's like the downside to having like those iframes in any game, really. Like, is that sometimes you can just cheese past obstacles if you're willing to tank a hit. Now that's something to keep an eye out for now on my next playthrough.
You
I think
know,
I froze the room again. I think I did the whole freeze it again and stacked to another echo.
That would have worked.
Oh, okay.
Yep. I think I found out about, again, I'm not going to spoil too much of this, but the switching of the mechanic by accident at the end.
You mean the
And
ice,
that-
fire, and
Yeah. Because you don't, obviously, you don't really need to do it until the last moment.
Yeah, I didn't do it until the last moment as well. It was just like, in fairness, I was up pretty late, so a bit of the ice temple is a blur. Very, very apologetic for that, and is why I'll be doing a second playthrough. But yeah, I didn't even process it until the very end, where I was like, oh, that's a boss key right there. I wonder what they want me to do with that.
Yeah, I think that was the one where I felt where there was so much more potential to engage that mechanic, where to me it just felt like what was happening were they were putting more rooms in between where you put the thing and where you had to do the thing without actually changing how you navigated the in-between.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair. I think I love that mechanic in that temple, which is why it's my favorite of this game's dungeon offerings. But I do agree that I think it could have been taken like a few puzzles more of having to like switch the hot and cold.
Yeah, and I don't want to denigrate the mechanic, because I think the mechanic is a good mechanic and it makes for a good dungeon.
Absolutely.
since we talked about this bit, I will actually bring up the thing I wanted to bring up about the Farin dungeon in particular. It's mostly prevalent in the Farin Temple, but I'm pretty sure a couple other dungeons did this. The switches that you have to hit both at the exact same time, they're like the flower switches. Did anybody else feel really stuck on those for a while because what they provide you with doesn't work for some reason, but echoes do?
Yeah, they felt
Yes.
so obtuse to me, and I didn't... And I'm not going to say that's a flaw, because maybe it was me, like, maybe it was my neurons not firing, but I still don't, like, fully understand how they work, but I finagled my way around them.
Yeah, every time they came up for me, I finagled it of, not to fully spoil it, but basically what I do is I would create echoes of the Armos Knights, let one go so it would walk onto it, and then I would grab the other one with the bind, and then I would step onto the switch with it at the exact moment. And every time these came up, that was how I did it, because I wasn't figuring out how to like get them to go at the same time, or what else could possibly solve it at the same time.
That's so much smarter. I was just like lining them up across like the wall so they hit the wall at the same time and went the other way at the same time.
Oh man.
So I think there's 3 instances of that puzzle in that dungeon, if I'm recalling correctly. And I think each time I did it a different way. And so one time I did the same thing that you just said you did, Tris, where I had the Armos and then I jumped on the other one at the same time that it was stepping on it. Another point, I had 2 Armos going, and then I had like a boulder, and I kept just like adjusting the distance of the boulder to the switch gradually to like force the timing to line up. I can't remember the other time. Maybe it's just the 2, but what I needed to do was very, in my view, like very clear to me immediately. It was just like, oh, just pulling it off is a different story. Yeah.
It's interesting because I did the Hebrew temple first, and I think maybe that temple scaffolded that like mechanic a little bit better because it had the ice blocks, and I think that was easy enough to put 2 and 2 together of what was supposed to happen. But I think if I'd done it the opposite way, like Farin first, I think I probably would have been more confused.
Mm.
Yeah, I did Hebrew first too, and I think it's the thing where you push the ice blocks and you expect to get 1 on each, and then you're like, okay, that's the puzzle. And then when it doesn't happen, the next step is like, do they want me to do this thing that I have to do? And then, yeah.
Right.
That's interesting. That is another good point, though, Katie, is like the order you do the dungeons in, I think, does color a lot of the experience for, like, because I did... and actually, I before we do the next subject, I do kind of want to field what everyone's dungeon orders looked like. But I did, obviously Southern Ruins has to always be your first dungeon. And then I did Gerudo Sanctum, then Jabul. And then, obviously, Hyrule Castle has to be the 4th. And then I did Eldin, Farin, and then Hebra as my last one. But because I had already done Eldin and I had some fire enemies, a lot of the combat in the ice dungeon ended up feeling very almost trivial because I had all these like fire whiz robes and stuff. And then I had a lot of people tell me like, oh, I struggled so much with this enemy or this boss. Yeah, I'm curious, I guess, what everyone's dungeon order looked like and how they felt that might have shaped their experience in a different way than maybe other people did.
Yeah, I did. In terms of the ones you can choose, I went Gerudo, Zora, Farron, Eldin, and then Hebra.
Exactly the same here.
Yeah. My logic was like, at the time, the only place I had never been to on the map was Farron. So that was the first place I wanted to dart after Hyrule Castle. And the thing I noticed throughout that is that, and this is pretty specific, but I felt like after doing the Farron Temple, the Eldin Temple, it was clear to me that that's like, you know, I'm not going to say a game that lets you approach the dungeons in any way you want to has a dungeon order, but to kind of like use Bergerson's tendency to put together an order in his dungeon analysis videos, that is most likely, I think Eldin is like the intended fourth one. Not to mention Eldin's boss being the fourth in the boss rush mode. I don't know, but what I realized is that after Farron, Eldin felt pretty easy in comparison, which means I think I want to do Eldin fourth next time. But other than that, I honestly think they did a pretty good job not making them too, like, there being too much whiplash while still being, you know, still ramping them up in difficulty. And I think, yeah, Heber's probably going to be most people's last dungeon, just because they're like, ooh, wait, I haven't been to this region at all yet. Although I guess you can if you use a bombfish.
True.
And, like, it's at the peak of a mountain. But that's just how I feel.
Yeah, Heber does feel like the hardest one to get to even get to that dungeon. It feels like the longest trek, and I think it's the only one where you need to come equipped with like potions or smoothies to like protect yourself from the climate itself, which is a very Wilds era mechanic.
I'm going to jump in there because Hebra was the one I didn't do last. So I did the first half like everyone else, and then I did Eldin, Hebra, Farron, just because I was hyped for the Deku Scrubs and wanted to savor them, so I savored them for last. But I think you're right that the Nehru Temple feels like it's the hardest, and I had, I think, the most fun getting there because of that winter mechanic. And I was just making smoothies to make smoothies because they wanted you to make smoothies, and I didn't have smoothies for the cold, and so I was just carrying what are the little Candlezol boys called? Ignazols, yeah. So I would just carry one of those around, throw it, hit some guy. But I thought that was the most the environment asked of me, and being able to figure that out and still get through it. I also didn't talk to, again, I don't want to get too spoilery, I didn't talk to the person you can talk to on top of the mountain there, and I just ended up somewhere else, and then he came and found me. So
whoa, really?
Yeah.
Really? So
I had no clue you could do that.
I saw him and I walked up to him and I didn't get a prompt, so I was like, oh, maybe this is something that happens later. And then I went to wherever place you end up going, and he met me there and was like, come on back.
That happened to me too.
They don't force you to. That's so interesting.
That exact happened to me as well.
Wow, okay. Yeah, I had no idea that could even be, or that was, I'm glad they accounted for that, because that's really cool.
I must have been the only one at Hebrew was like, I didn't have any smoothies, I just kind of tanked it and just healed damage off.
Oh, what did you use to heal damage with? Just like ingredients? Like you were
just like smoothies and ingredients, to be honest. Just outpace the cold.
Yeah, I was the same. I definitely tried to just power through that.
That's what I did in Breath of the Wild.
I don't know if this is the case in Echoes, because I haven't tried it, but I can say in Breath of the Wild is woefully inefficient to not cook for those kind of things unless you have armor for it.
Yeah, everyone's first experience in Death Mountain was one to be remembered.
Yes.
I do think someone told me, and feel free to correct me if anyone knows for sure to the contrary, but I think someone told me once that if you have the third version of the bed, which heals faster, and there's also another thing you can get that will increase that healing speed. Someone essentially said that the damage you take in the cold is slower than the healing rate while resting in the bed, and so you can just basically like power through and then spawn a bed to heal quickly, and then power through.
Yeah, that was
some
my
more.
main way of healing too.
Oh, really? Okay,
so... whenever I needed to.
Yeah, I was all about the smoothies.
Until creatures start attacking you, and then the healing doesn't cancel out.
Right.
Right.
Just as a funny note, every other video game I've ever played that has a resting mechanic will tell you cannot rest here because there are enemies nearby. I appreciate that Zelda does not care. She will rest there if enemies are nearby.
More like courage than wisdom at that point.
Yes.
I vaguely recall the bed does do that, and I think someone said the slower beds do the same thing technically, but it's like really like 2 frame difference or something.
That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't tested it. It's just something I've heard, but I wasn't sure if anyone knew for sure, like definitively.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to add on to your tangent about the side-scrolling bit.
Oh, yes, please do.
So I'm a big lover of The Adventure of Link, and
Same.
I've always wanted a sequel to it. And contrary to you, I have actually always really loved the 2D sections because it's the closest thing I'm ever going to get to a sequel, most likely. But in this game, it really, really felt like Nintendo was starting to become very confident in the 2D sections, whereas in other games, they felt very shaky, and I can see why you don't like them, and they almost felt like they were just there because they couldn't figure out any other way to tie these rooms together. Whereas in this game, like, there really felt like there was a lot of thought going into the design of these 2D sections, and that they themselves were designed to be fun areas to explore and enjoy. And it really, really makes me hopeful that maybe that confidence leads them to maybe one day make a new 2D Zelda game, even if it was just in the 2D portion of the engine, further developed to have more mechanics. I think that would be fantastic because I really, really enjoy those sections.
I agree, honestly. We need more Zelda 2 love.
I do think Zelda 2 is an underappreciated entry in the series. I would love to see it get a proper remake someday that gives it like the Metroid 2 treatment, but that would be, I think, very cool. But yeah, I think you, Nayra, you summed up my feelings on it, is that very much like, I won't say like I hate them, but I haven't liked them in like Link's Awakening or the Oracle games, these 2D section, or not 2D sections, side-scrolling sections, because I've always felt like they feel underbaked, and they do feel like I said, just like a way to bridge these areas without just properly doing it. But yeah, this game, it did feel like they really embraced the concept and made it actually fun to do, and there's puzzles that are different in those two, there was no real good use for the strantulas outside of those sections, so there's like mechanics that feel tailor-made for these areas as well. And so yeah, I don't know, I thought it was a big improvement. Absolutely.
And the 2D mazes were so much fun.
Absolutely. So yeah, you kind of nailed my thoughts on it there. Excellent. Well, carrying on, another thing I found really stood out to me in this game, just in general, was the plethora of side content and just like little moments that happen outside of that main story and outside of the dungeons. But this game had me procrastinating and just exploring and finding things, and there's so many secrets to find. So I guess just curious for what sort of side content stood out to people, how they felt about it, and if there's any like one little moment that resonated with you on maybe a personal level, if you're willing to share it, if it's not too personal.
We've all got to admit that being able to talk to cats was probably the coolest thing in the game, right?
Hell yes.
100%.
Yes.
Yes. Just how amazing that concept was in this game. Just the fact there's both a cat suit and a black cat suit, and they've got all these fun things to have their owners. Just wow. On a more serious level, I guess the way they kind of reward you with echoes is kind of nice to see with sort of the side content. Like a lot of the caves you get later in the game, like they end with like a level 3 echo only found that cave, so like a mini boss you defeat, and then it becomes an echo to use later. So I guess in a way it's like a legendary Pokemon setup with stuff like level 3 Darknut, Lizalfos, level 2 Guinea, the Lionel, etc. There's also quite a lot of times it's like, this is surprisingly complicated for a bit of side content in the game. It's like there's a whole quest line of dungeons with that one boss from Oracle of Ages that doesn't appear anywhere else. And then I went to a cave in Death Mountain once. It's like, oh wait, that's the entire mini dungeon for that fire talus thing. It just looked like any other cave in the game, but it just wasn't, I guess. I will say on the less positive side, I feel like trying to search down the mic crystals is honestly kind of a nightmare, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that was the last thing I did, was finding the mic crystals. Although this might be a minor spoiler, there is a way to make that process easier, but yeah, there's just a lot of them. So
they've got the same mistake they did with other Zelda games. They don't have like a breakdown per area of how many in each area. I vaguely remember in a Link Between Worlds, I might have noted down how many Maimays are in each area, right?
yes, yeah, A Link Between Worlds did do that, and I don't know why they haven't continued to, because that would make my never-ending Korok hunts so much more bearable to do.
That's kind of weird to think about. This is probably the first Zelda game in like 7 or so years where Koroks have not appeared at all.
Maybe Zelda can't see them. I don't know, because not everyone can see Koroks apparently.
Oh, that's true.
Or maybe they all got swallowed by a rift. I don't know.
There's some conspiracy stuff here. It's not ending here.
I mean, given that the Deku Tree is in its own area now, maybe Korok Forest did get eaten by a rift or something.
Oh no!
I hope
It
not.
didn't come back.
I do love those little stinkers, the little Koroks, but you know.
I guess it's kind of nice to see that, I guess, accessories and clothing are there, and there's quite a lot of side quests here. Like the fact there's about, I think there's 50 or so, which is nice to see. Promotional moments. I mean, let's face it, everyone's going to probably say the Yeti on that mountain, so I'm just going to go with it before anyone else does.
You called it. That was a big standout moment for me too. But that and sort of a spoiler, but I guess like those were more main story stuff. But Darstan, the Goron chief, his whole thing with like his dad like wanting to live up to that sort of legacy was pretty touching, I thought, as well. But also, yeah, Conde, again, spoilers, people watching, but his like him talking to his dad's grave to be like, I'm gonna do, you know, right by you, and then you can like go examine the grave and try will be like, how is this his dad? And I'm like, you don't get it.
Oh god, try.
Yeah.
Also, Dalston, you mean the better you know, Bo?
Honestly, I wasn't gonna say it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Poor Yunobo.
I really enjoyed the fact that the world was just like alive again. It didn't have the post-apocalyptic thing going on, which I mean I think totally worked for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and I really liked it for them. But yeah, it felt nice to be in a Hyrule where like every settlement, every village is, you know, flourishing. They're full of life. There's just all the people you can talk to in this game really make it for me. That's just something I really love about it. I love going up to people and talking to them. I've always loved that in Zelda games. I just have to talk to every single character. It's like an obsession. This game definitely cares to that. There's lots of fun characters, especially in Castletown. When you first get there, before I did anything with the main story, I just started talking to people. I like fixating on just little things that people say, even if it doesn't mean anything. I just like seeing what NPCs have to say. Yeah, I love that the world's alive. It's a really cool part of the game.
No, I agree. I think, I mean, you summed it up well. Like you said, for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that worked because that was the story. But to get a third game that's like post-apocalyptic, I think would be a bit much. Like, and it's always nice to see Hyrule in its like in a thriving state.
This Hyrule is post-apocalyptic. It's more like mid-apocalyptic because they are being eaten alive by the rifts. But, you know, business as usual in most of the towns. But yeah, I'll echo what Adam said. I mean, I think the quests where you interact with lots of different characters and get to enjoy the dialogue was probably a big part of what helped bring the world to life for me. I think that's what generally feels so special about Zelda games for me, and I think this one really delivered on it. And yeah, I also spent a lot of time talking to every human and also every cat in every village, and the dialogue there was a lot of fun. I mean, my teeny tiny spoiler, but like you talk to a guy, the shopkeeper, I think in Soothorn Village, is saying he said my wife is in Castletown spying on the shopkeeper there to find out more about how to make our shop better, and then you go to the other store and she's there. So there's just all these little connections that kind of keep the place alive. My one criticism about the side quests, I haven't 100%ed yet, so maybe there are some I'm missing, but I did feel like I was wanting more side quests and also a more natural way to access them versus basically it would be sweeping each town for quest indicators after each story beat and trying to figure out what is activating the different side quests. So yeah. I don't know what that would have been, but that was my only critique. I loved them and I thought they were a lot of fun, but yeah. And I'm also definitely very outfit motivated, and so those quests were very high priority for me.
Actually, a good point about that too is, this is like again, not a story spoiler, but like maybe a minor gameplay spoiler, is that and this was the case in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom as well. After you beat the game and then you reload, you get the little star beside your save file, and it gives you some indication of like what you're still missing, right? Unlike Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, it doesn't actually give you like an actual percent, a numerical percent, and it doesn't have, unless I'm missing it or didn't see it, it doesn't actually give you like a list of how many side quests you're missing. So it'll tell you like how many heart pieces you're missing. But I literally went through my quest log and counted how many I had done, and I had done them all according to Google at least. It would have been nice for some way baked into the game itself for me to know for sure that I had actually done them all. But you know,
I would echo the sentiments about the mini dungeons. When I found the first one, I think it's called the Eastern Temple now. I walked in and thought, oh, is this what this is? And then that's what it was. And then I got to the boss at the end and I thought, oh, that's pretty good. And then I walked out and I got something that was valuable for my efforts. And I thought, okay, that was a good little thing. How many more of these are there out in Hyrule? So I like that. I like that too. That's not post-apocalyptic, but it's not only that the world is alive; it's that it's got some optimism. Everyone sort of goes through something and resolves it in your time there, even if it's Darston who does it in 10 seconds or whatever. I still think that the idea that no matter how simple or I don't know if it's delivered in sort of a childish way where it's like, oh, I can still do these things, but I got to find my own way to do these things. I still think there's value in, I guess, a mainline AAA game having some optimism in it. And so I think that really stuck with me. There are two events that, well, I guess three. One, if we go back to our boy Condi again, he says something about his dad becoming a star, which you get something from him that he's a bit simpler than other people and he can't really understand the depths of what is being told to him, but that doesn't mean he doesn't understand what's being told to him. So when he said that, I was like, oh man, my heart breaks for you, buddy. And then the other one was, I also can't remember what was said, but it was sort of a little wholesome moment when you save the Zora kid from the cave and the mom comes and gets him. And then my favorite one is just the side quest with the Deku's in the lake with the rift.
Yeah. Okay, of all the like random Breath of the Wild locations to come back, the little heart-shaped pond really surprised me in a pleasant way. I was like, whoa, okay.
It's not so just cute. The pond, it's what's in the pond, yeah.
Yeah, it's so cute, that little interaction. And you can even go back and check on them and they'll be like chit-chatting, and I don't know what everyone's relationship status is like, but even like I'm in a relationship that I've been in for the last 15 years almost, and even sometimes I'm like, you still like me, right? So
yeah, well that's the thing too. It's like that was the whole thing is I wasn't sure, but then just the reassurance of, well, yeah, I was just taken away by this rift I couldn't really do anything about, but
yeah,
I still dig you. So yeah, I think that one was good.
It was cute. I agree.
For side content, I haven't engaged in too much of it yet. I actually didn't even finish the game by the time this call started. I just watched the ending on YouTube.
That was one of the conditions I sent you.
I was so positive I was going to get it done in time, and then just a ridiculous amount of stuff popped up. But such is life. I literally got to the I beat the last dungeon. It was just the final portion of the game I didn't finish. So I was like, whatever, I'll just watch it on YouTube. But I haven't engaged with too much side content yet. But what I have enjoyed doing is watching our good friend Tyler Townsend lose his mind over the horse racing.
Yeah.
That's been pretty enjoyable.
On that note, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to know if this was anyone else's experience as well. If you did the horse race, was it just me, or was the beginning race way harder than the medium and the hard one?
Yes.
Yes.
The last two I did immediately.
Yeah.
First try.
First try.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not just me.
The real problem is all the text you have to go through and all the dialogue you have to go through just to do it again.
I swear, I burned a cool 100 rupees just retrying that first one, and then I did the other two on the first try, and I was like, what the heck?
Apparently you can use bind to move the stuff, and I never knew that until I looked on Reddit.
Oh, you can use like bind to. Oh wait, yeah, no, I knew that. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Oh really? Oh
yeah,
wow.
like they have you like you can like bind a like box or a stone midair or like mid charge and push it up against a tree so your horse jumps over it and you feel like the coolest person in the world.
Okay, well, I wish I had known that sooner.
I was in the middle of writing a review for this game, and the one thing I said about bind was it's the power you forget you have until you realize the way to solve something is with bind.
Yes,
that's so true.
Very true. In the, again, on the topic of side content, and in the dojo, there was one challenge I was really struggling to get in the time limit, and then I was like, oh, I can just use bind to drop these guys off the edge. And
was it the ice one?
No, it was one that had a bunch.
It was the Gibdo one, wasn't it?
One. It was the
Yeah,
exactly what I did too.
Thing. Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm glad these are not like it's not just me. This is very reassuring. Yeah, I felt like I had such like a facepalm moment with myself. I'm like, Daniel, you know better than that.
I honestly think I did it for both.
Well, oops. But sorry, Nehru, I did interrupt you with that sub tangent. So please do go on with what you were saying.
I was just gonna say about the emotional moment part. Has the spoiler train sailed? Can I just give a warning and then talk about it because it's a spoiler moment?
Go ahead. Yeah, you gave the warning. People watching are warned.
I really actually was surprisingly touched by Try's goodbye. I didn't think I was gonna be, but I really like Try, and the goodbye at the end was really, really sweet. The way Zelda got super sad and Try kind of figured out why she was sad. At first I was worried it was going to kind of be the Fee's farewell all over again, but it wasn't. They found like a different direction to go with, even though they're both kind of emotionless, floaty people. But yeah, I just thought it was really, really cute, and it didn't make me cry or anything, but it definitely choked me up more than the goodbye for probably 95% of Zelda companions.
The whole thing, I wouldn't say that Try was emotionless, just like they had this sort of childlike naivety that, and like kind of like lack of grasping sort of humanity in some ways, because they were not like of this plane of existence basically. But I did think that was really touching. That whole moment, that whole goodbye, the like I feel thank you, was just adorable.
It was so well set up earlier with Try learning what thank you meant and puzzling over it and stuff.
Yeah.
And then for Try to pull that out at the end of the game was a good writing.
I agree.
It hit me kind of hard too. At least I don't know. Actually, I don't know Try's gender. I think Try's just a little goober. You know, this is me reading into the text. But something that hit me a lot is that Try is capable of emotion, but has a hard time discerning it and learning how to respond to it, which honestly kind of hit me a little bit, because it's a deeper subject, but a lot of the people that I grew up with, very close friends, have had autism. And especially growing up at a younger age, you have the capacity for these feelings, but it's harder for you, and you can get socially ostracized for not comprehending why two people are fighting, not understanding, what the proper response here or there is. So Try, I think, is just like on a deeper level, to me at least, represents like the ability to feel and like the ability to express, but the challenges that kind of come with having your mind being wired differently. And that context just like, I don't know, it kind of made me like, this is something that I've seen so many loved ones go through, and I feel like it's, on a very subtextual level, I don't know, I see Try as less of a kind of robotic character and more of a character that is learning how to express itself. I find that, I found that really, really touching.
I do really think there's something that just sets Try a little bit above the sort of generic, like Celia and some of the other Zelda companions that don't really stick in your mind too much.
Mm-hmm.
There's just that extra little bit of writing and attention that was paid to Try to ensure that when I think about Zelda companions, Try will stand out a little bit more in the way that somebody like Lineback does for me, or somebody like Fee or Navi.
It was brought up earlier, but I got so addicted to the horse minigame. I just loved it through and through, even with how annoying it could be. And I just like started and I did not stop until it was all done. Maybe it's like the Ocarina of Time fan in me, but having the horse race minigame and having in reference to kind of Ocarina of Time 3D, having a boss rush mode, both as side content, was just like, it was refreshing, and it felt accessible, and it felt like they were kind of looking out for people who really missed when there were like mini games that you can go back to and just consistently enjoy without too much hassle in setup, which is something I felt kind of missing from Breath of the Wild. And yeah, almost all the mini games were just standout to me, and I love them.
I think it's worth mentioning about the mini games too, is that Lil Bean Green mentioned this as well, but a lot of the side quests and mini games had like tangible rewards that like felt unique and worth getting. And I think that's the big thing, because like I never feel compelled to go back and play Ultra Ball Hall in Tears of the Kingdom because all I'm gonna get out of it is rupees, which I can just get elsewhere by selling, and there's no like quest log attached to it or anything like that, right? So it's like, that's great, those minigames definitely were there, but I never felt compelled to actually complete them, I guess, in the Wild games, which by the way, like, people might get the impression listening to this discussion that I am the ultimate Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom hater. I'm not. There's like some of my favorite games ever, but I can't deny that like there are parts of it that were lacking that this game I just feel does better, and that's one of them, definitely. That Eastern Temple as well, like Bean said, was just super cool. Just also very cool the fact that like all these A Link to the Past landmarks are here, and like lots of throwbacks, which my inner fanboy just squealed about, because that was my first ever video game, was A Link to the Past, so it's like a very personal thing for me. But anyways, I'm getting off track now.
Yeah, we've mentioned the Eastern Temple quite a bit, but I need to stress how Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Ages are like up there as like some of my they've always been in my top 5 favorite Zeldas.
That's so
And
That's
I
the
feel like I'm
coolest
always
thing you've
fighting the
ever
world
said.
on that. So so I love those games so much. And after completing the Gerudo area and heading off to the Zora area, I was like, oh hey, let me just go see where Eastern Temple is like. And then there's a side quest there, and it's getting into spoilers with it, but we're gonna play a game. And I'm like, oh, that sounds so something back in my mind feels a little familiar with that. And going in this mini dungeon and finding it is the exact boss from, I think it's like the 5th dungeon of specifically Oracle of Ages, which is such a random pull, but like a really fun reference. That made me really happy as someone that really like constantly champions the Oracle games. Getting that kind of like boss representation in there, and it was so interesting how it's not just the boss that you knew, but it's also, okay, well, you don't have that specific item from before, the one item that you really needed to beat it. And now you have a whole arsenal of anything with the echoes that could be used in that way. And it put a whole different spin on actually trying to go about that boss. And I love that they actually brought that back. I never expect them to actually reference the Oracle games. They always kind of feel a little forgotten. So seeing that in there actually made me feel like really, really happy. And that made me feel a little emotional, because those were actually like among my first Zelda games. So I hold them in a very like special place in my heart. So getting any reference to them is a win to me.
That's a great answer. That was a standout moment, and the fact that you got like a rematch with him later too is super cool.
Yeah, and it was a hard one too.
Yeah. That's another thing, is there's a lot of like deep cut references. Like there's some enemies where I'm like, oh, Biodeku Babas have only been in Majora's Mask, or these the little scorpion guys. I cannot quite remember their name, like Arudas or something. They're like the little Cyclops scorpions. I'm like, these guys, we have not seen them since Zelda 2. Like that's like crazy that they show up like this. So yeah, just the fact that they just pulled all these elements from pretty much every game you can think of. That's attention to detail. That's like a nice sign of like reverence for the series, I think. I guess we got to get into the more heavy spoilery stuff now. So again, if you're watching this and this already wasn't too spoilery for you, we have to talk lore stuff, specifically the timeline, because love it or hate it, the Zelda timeline is a subject that is always going to come up into discussion whenever there's a new game. So I feel like it has to be addressed. But what I am curious about is what everyone's feelings of how the lore stuff was implemented in the game, and if they have a view on where this game may or may not fall into the timeline itself, if you have an opinion about that. And your opinion can be, I don't care about the timeline. That's totally valid also. Because I think there's something to be said for just playing these games to enjoy them on their own merits, instead of like trying to fit them into a chronology that is admittedly at times convoluted. So I do have thoughts on that, but I do want to hear what you guys say.
Oh god, the reveal for the villain has probably just completely shook up the entire series. Like, I'm just gonna say that this basically now just made me re-look at the older games and think, oh my god, that thing was there all along. So there's like before Demise, there's something before Skyward Sword, there's something before pretty much every other Zelda game ever existed, and it's just been waiting to attack and just destroy everything. And that kind of brings up its own kind of lore questions too. It's like, assuming this is like after Triforce Heroes and the Link Between Worlds and whatever, because it's got the same world map as Link to Past with a lot of things in ruin, that kind of makes you want to know what would happen in, say, the other timelines with this thing, this villain and this situation. Because logically, if it was in Downfall, that means this thing wouldn't be stopped in the adult and child timelines, or maybe the wild one. So that's going to be an interesting thing to think about in future. I'm kind of happy the way they did it, because I've seen a lot of times the shows completely shake up the whole story, formula and world, and introduce a bunch of new background details, and it just hasn't worked out for a while. There's a lot of a chance it could go wrong. Like I say, every Doctor Who fan knows at the time the children thing, and how that's completely shook up the fan base.
Yes.
So the fact they introduced Null so well, and they introduced the whole Rifts thing, and it doesn't feel like a complete just thrown in random idea that makes no sense, just is kind of impressive to see.
Yeah, and I think a good point that you make is like there's almost a difference between new lore that recontextualizes the existing canon versus a retcon that contradicts existing canon. Something similar that happened was I remember after Skyward Sword beating that for the first time, and I immediately played Ocarina of Time, and I kept thinking how after finishing Skyward Sword, as soon as I got the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time, it completely changed the way I view what is otherwise like a plot MacGuffin. Oh, it's the powerful sword, right? It totally made me change how I viewed the Master Sword. And then there's a moment like at the final battle in Ocarina of Time where the sword glows for a moment, and at the time in real life it means nothing. It's just a magic glow. But in my head I'm like, holy cow. Like now looking back on it, this moment has been recontextualized to there is actually a voice in the sword, you know, and like Link is hearing it. And so I think in the same vein, this whole thing with Null and the whole creation myth gets like a new layer of meaning added to it that I think is really fascinating to think about. Like, 'cause like you said, it does make you look back at all these old games and think like, oh, there's something under the world that's festering and waiting all this time.
I'm gonna sound like such a bad Zelda-tuber here, but I'm definitely someone who's more on the side of not really caring too much about the timeline.
Oh, we're gonna cancel you on Twitter, Adam. I'm sorry. No, I'm kidding.
Well, let everybody know now I'm going to be cancelled. I'm going to be honest. The timeline is exhausting at the best of times. I'm a big fan of theories and like discussing it. It's just for me personally, I feel like I'm just at a point where every time I go to discuss it, it just ends with me being caught in going in circle after circle, talking about different contradictions. It just goes into a complete rabbit hole that completely fries my brain, and it just... Oh, it's just not for me, the timeline. I mean, I'm definitely intrigued to know where this game falls in the timeline, but I'm not particularly excited to discuss it.
No, that's fair. Like I did say at the beginning, and I was joking about canceling you, but I did say at the beginning, like that is a valid standpoint. I do think that there is value, like to just enjoying the games. Like there are clear instances, I think, where, you know, obviously Wind Waker, its whole story hinges on Ocarina of Time's existence, but like in the grand scheme of things, like the rest of the timeline maybe matters a little less when looking at like Breath of the Wild. So, you know, like I hear you. This is my point. But you know, if we didn't include it in this conversation, there would be comments about it.
Oh, exactly. And it's like, I feel like being a Zelda creator, I've always got this thing in the back of my head telling me I need to talk about it, but I've tried my best going into this game to just not really think about it too much, because I know it's just going to be the same thing I have with every Zelda game. I'm going to get all stressed about where does it... I just don't want to fix on the timeline anymore. It's just not for me anymore. I really just enjoy the game for the game.
That's fair. No, that's a fair and valid standpoint to take. I kind of fall like with one foot in either side of the fence, I guess, because I actually always think it's like almost like a puzzle in and of itself sometimes, and I just like a good puzzle. But I do think people get a little too heated about it sometimes too.
And it's just that part of it that kind of puts me off of it, because, you know, like you said with Wind Waker, sometimes it's a very apparent piece of the game, the timeline. But other games, it's not so much. It's not so important, in my opinion.
That's fair. That's fair. KT, I'm very curious what you have to say about this, because you made a video before the game released that I really enjoyed, talking about timeline potential. And now that you've gone through and finished the game, I'm thinking maybe your stance has changed, maybe not, but I'm curious what you have to say about it, so go ahead.
So for anyone who didn't see the video, I'll start by saying I'm not a timeline specialist in any way, so I think a lot of people have a lot more detailed knowledge of various things that make different games fall in different parts of the timeline than I do. But my theory was that the game was going to be at the end of the Downfall timeline and right around Convergence, either right before or right after Convergence, or potentially the rifts could have had something to do with the Convergence. I think that part of the theory didn't hold up. I think the still world really doesn't have anything to do with the timelines in a way I thought they might have. But I do think, I mean, the first thing I did in the game was go hunting for the Rito, because I thought that would be the thing that would kind of put the puzzle into place. Like, this is the first post-Convergence game right before Breath of the Wild by a couple thousand years. But we didn't have the Rito, so that was kind of a drag. So that would have proved that the game was right after Convergence. I think maybe that there's some deep dives that I haven't done yet that can be done to maybe make that argument that it's post-Convergence. But who knows? I'm kind of, as you said, one foot in each camp. I think timeline theory is fun in the way that you can think about how the games connect, but the specifics can be really tricky. But then again, there are, enemies from pretty much every game, so would love to see kind of a breakdown of everything that's pulled from each game now that we have access to everything. But yeah, in terms of lore in general, I think you guys put it best that Null added another layer to the creation myth, and I haven't really processed what that means for lore as a whole. But I think it's open-ended enough that theorists can have a lot of fun with that, so thank you, Nintendo, for that. We will eat well for a little while. But I think in terms of timeline and lore in general, it's kind of open-ended, and that's the fun thing about it.
I agree. I do have a theory that your video spurred on and then had me thinking about it, and then after finishing the game, I came to a similar but different conclusion. But I might save that until after everyone else has had a chance to speak, or I'll ramble about it. So, Little Bean Green, how about you, my friend?
If I can butcher a quote from Andros in Star Fox 64, Adam, if you're going down, then take me with you. I will be the first person to say that I don't care about the timeline to the point of being openly adversarial about it. Not really.
Right.
I don't want to yuck anybody's yums, but I don't think I think it's clung too tightly for my tastes. But I do like that, Cap, like you said earlier, it's not that the lore we got in Ocarina of Time was retconned, it was that it was deepened, and that creation myth was there. And I like that they brought in some of the elements from real world creation myth, where it's like you've got the something and you've got the nothing. And usually when those things are there, they just are there. They're not good or evil, but that doesn't really work well in a Zelda game. So I like the inclusion of Null. I like that his I don't know if it was a plan or just worked out that way, is very Ganondorfian from Ocarina of Time, right before the Master Sword's pulled, and it sort of works out the same way, where when he gets to the, what's it called in this game, the Prime Energy, that it reacts the same way.
Yes.
And then so I just think that the consistency there was appreciated. And then I think it was nice that there was a story not built on time travel, and that it was a villain that was new and different enough, while also being a sizable threat to our hero and our priestess.
Well said, absolutely. That was a moment, with the Prime Energy, which we all know is, again, spoilers if you're still here watching this and you don't know, if you haven't clicked off somehow, but the Triforce, how it did follow those rules that were set up way back in Ocarina of Time of like, if your heart's imbalanced, then you only keep the piece that aligns with, the virtue you value most, and then the other two pieces go to other predestined holders. And that just that moment of like, and they didn't even really need to explain it, it just made sense. And I think if you didn't know that lore, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But if you do know the lore, it's like a nice little moment where you're like, I see what they did there. I am gonna pick your brain a little, if that's all right, because I'm curious when you say like you get a little adversarial about it, if you can elaborate on that, because again, like I think there is room for sort of both sides of that discussion. You know what I mean? So
no, I absolutely agree, but I don't think the timeline matters, especially now. I think the connections between games, some connections between games are more important than other games. It becomes too tangled of a web to be comprehensible. And to me, I don't think there are clear answers to make all the connections. And I think maybe not now, based on this game we got, but it seems like the past two games, Nintendo was trying to distance themselves from actually thinking about the timeline while saying that it was still relevant. And to me, what they showed and what they said did not match up. And so when people were trying to make all these connections, to me, it just didn't feel like they were there. So personally, I don't like to waste my time with it, but I think there are compelling connections to be made. And if people can find those, then more power to them.
Yeah,
I'm not really adversarial. I don't want to fight you because you know what the timeline is.
I'll fight you, Bean. No, I'm kidding.
I will. Yeah,
no, but I do think it's one of those things where it's like it's an element that's nice, and I like I said, I always have viewed it as like kind of like a neat little puzzle more than anything I would ever like stress about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
there's a book series called The Book of the New Sun, and it's time travel shenanigans. It's really cryptic, and it's been around for like 40 or 50 years, and people are still trying to figure out what it all means. And it's hard to tell if anything is there, but it seems like it is, but it's hard to know because there aren't actually any answers. And so the mystery is interesting, and I appreciate the mystery probably more than if there were actually answers. But
I think that can be said about a lot of Zelda lore. There's appeal to the mystery.
It's nice when there's a mystery, but there's evidence.
Unfortunately, anybody who's watching this podcast really keen to hear a bunch of Zeldatubers deep dive into the timeline placement is going to be hugely disappointed, because I'm going to be, 4 out of 5 who's going to give the answer of, I don't really care about the timeline, unfortunately. I used to like the timeline a lot when it first came out, and I still like that it exists, but the community has soured me on the timeline so much because, and I've been a Zelda-tuber for about 6 years, 7 years, and before Breath of the Wild, and even in the early points of Breath of the Wild, people were mad that the timeline existed. They were always like, "Oh, it doesn't make sense. The game matchings are bad. It's why is it even here? Why did Nintendo release this? They didn't put enough work into it." Just constantly complaining about it, right? I used to make a YouTube series called Hyrule History, where I, treated Hyrule like I was a history teacher teaching Hyrule's history. And whenever I would go timeline by timeline for something like the Redead and talk about how it manifests in different timelines, I'd get so many comments of people getting mad that I'm even notioning the timeline. And then when Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom came out and disregarded the timeline entirely, people are now mad that the timeline isn't being followed and isn't being utilized. And I understand that it's different people, in each camp getting mad, but from the perspective of someone who's getting their comments filled up with nonsense, it's still horrible to deal with either way, right? So for me, it's like the timeline is not going to make anybody happy no matter what way it manifests. So I've just kind of disregarded. I think it was probably a bad idea to begin with, even though I think Nintendo just did it out of a sense of fan service, right? And they didn't think people were going to take it nearly as seriously as they do, because I often think Nintendo underestimates the seriousness of the Zelda fandom. So I'm not a big timeline guy either. I think if and this is how little thought I've given it, looking at the timeline, I kind of want it to fall into the child era timeline, because that's where all the other spooky games go. And this game's a little bit spooky.
It really is. If this game had released with a different art direction, it would. There are parts of it where I'm like, this could even get a T rating, but because they went with such an adorable aesthetic, it almost feels toned down. Yeah.
Realistically, it should probably go in the decline timeline, because that's where all the other games that use A Link to the Past map go, right? So it kind of makes sense. But thematically, I want it to go in the child era, even though that probably makes absolutely no sense, just because that's where all the spooky games go. As for the lore, I was so excited. I think we probably all were, but when I saw the goddesses being named, like being mentioned by name instead of just referred to as the goddesses, I got so excited.
So true.
It was so thrilling to see them back in like an official capacity. Not to throw any shade at Hylia. I love Hylia too, but she has very much stolen the spotlight for a very long time now, right? So it's like it's really exciting for me to see them brought back, even if we're freeing them. Clearly they're not very good gods if they're getting kidnapped, but even if it's us freeing them, I was just so happy to have them back. And while I've never been a big theory guy, I am very excited to see all the theories that come out of Noel and everything that he brings. I can't wait to see the void getting tied into the gap between dimensions and stuff like that. And I can't wait to see all the countless theories about how there's somehow a direct line between Noel to the Sheikah, because that always happens with every single spooky guy who ever comes out. And yeah, I really am very excited to see what the theory what the theory community does with these new, like, fundamentally shaking features like the void and null and everything that goes with that. I'm not looking forward to people getting frustrated by Nintendo never making reference to them ever again.
It's funny you mentioned about the gap between dimensions. I was joking in another conversation. In Ocarina of Time, at the end of the Forest Temple, you beat Phantom Ganon, and Ganondorf chimes in to the conversation and is like, "Oh, what a worthless creation. I will banish it to the gap between dimensions." And I was joking, do you think that like Null randomly just got like a little appetizer in that moment, just out of nowhere? Just portal opens up, Phantom Ganon gets dropped into the void, and Null's like, "What? Oh, a little snack, okay."
Yes, please.
Well, no, because apparently Phantom Ganon was making friends with blacksmiths, if Majora's Mask is anything to go by, with his
yes,
name being on the sword.
Well, that's my lore speculation for you. Null got a free Phantom Ganon snack randomly one day.
I have a relatively complicated relationship with the timeline. I'm also very mixed on it. I love everything that it represents, and I love everything that it, like, as a concept, gives to the community, obviously when employed respectfully. And I think it breeds so much, like, wonder and discussion, and adds multiple, like, layers on top of existing games to dig into. But at the same time, I love that it exists, and I am so much more happy that it exists rather than it not existing. I'm also not going to be too perturbed if it's not brought up or if a new Zelda game is going into a new canon, something like that. I loved what Breath of the Wild did. I love that it was in the future, like so far in the future that everything else faded into legend, but it was still something that occurred. What was hard for me with Tears of the Kingdom isn't that it kind of seemed to imply to be disconnecting itself from, previous lore, if not literally in like a referential sense. It was more that I couldn't tell what they were trying to say with it. And I didn't quite grasp whether they were like, we're moving in this direction or in that direction. And I felt that was pretty clear with Breath of the Wild. So when Echoes came out, I was actually pretty happy because in my mind, this is just my intuition. I am not an expert on the timeline. I love it, but I love what it represents more than the kind of literalistic rabbit hole aspect of it. What I love about Echoes of Wisdom is that it feels like it's in its own lane while still relating to other elements of the lore. I feel like it takes elements from tons of different Zelda games, even if it's just an enemy, while at the same time working just fine as a standalone story that doesn't kind of nag at my brain trying to discern where it is or not. And one of the reasons that I was so kind of intrigued by Null is because one of my favorite things to study is like history of religion and philosophy and all that. So I love it when Zelda goes into making their own mythology. And I love seeing how like real world history and myths and religious texts are kind of, okay, I'm going to say it, echoed through the Zelda writers, and they kind of create their own world out of that. That is kind of one of the reasons that I don't have a solid opinion on where Echoes is, and I'm okay with that, because I find so much value in the timeline, just like I find value in like discovering stuff about our world, because in history you can only know so much, you can only know so much about what people believed before you kind of hit a wall. And I feel similar with the timeline, because you can only know so much of what is or isn't canon. You can only know so much of what the Zelda team does or doesn't mean. So if you hold the timeline with an open hand instead of a firm grasp, it becomes so much more fun. And that's what I loved about Echoes of Wisdom, is because, it kind of went back to the creation story and added another layer on. That doesn't have to ruin Ocarina of Time for someone, because Echoes is pretty nebulous in a sense in its placement in my mind, since there's so much from past, present, future, all of that you can kind of go a lot of ways with Echoes. So it was just the idea that, in my mind at least, Echoes can work totally fine in the timeline or out of the timeline. It validated what I love about the timeline, in that it's more of a mystery that's not meant to be solved. Not literally, but that's how I love looking at it.
And I do think, kind of to riff on what you're saying a little bit, is that it's one of those things where, like, for me, it's one of those things that's great when it's there, but I don't need it, if that makes sense. I could play any Zelda game and just enjoy it on its own merits. But like when I do, like, I've just been finishing a Link's Awakening playthrough for video purposes, and like Link's Awakening, you could just take that game on its own and play it and just enjoy it as a standalone story, and it's a masterpiece. But it has little nods to A Link to the Past to sort of like draw a connection to those games. Like the Shadow Nightmare takes the form of Aghanim at one point during that boss fight, and like for me it's like, oh, that's like a nice little connecting piece to sort of pay off people who are in the know without alienating people who don't know. And I think that's kind of when the lore works at its best, if that makes sense.
I think that definitely is the best way to look at the timeline. It's to add references and nods, and the idea of loose connections. It definitely helps with loose connections, but outside of games that are direct sequels to each other, like Majora's Mask to Ocarina, or like Phantom Hourglass to Wind Waker, it's not really meant to be depended upon otherwise, I would say.
Right, yeah. Which, granted, I have so much respect and like admiration for those that go so deep into it, because I could not.
I will say that at one point in the year 2011, I think it was shortly before Skyward Sword, or around that time it came up, but before I had Hyrule Historia in my hands, a young bachelor, Daniel, in his first ever apartment on his own, had a wall of sticky notes that
I love it.
Was very rabbit holey about the Zelda timeline, and I was wrong about it, but I had a great time doing that.
For me, the timeline is something that I agree with what's been said before, so I'll once again, echo the thoughts of, I definitely think it works as more of a supplementary aspect that allows for like tie-ins, connections, but never like, the thread that holds the Zelda games together. Because I do think then when, they release new games and they take place in between other ones and they want to shift it around, suddenly it starts feeling a little weird then, as opposed to looking at, the last 3 big new Zeldas, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and even Echoes of Wisdom. The best enjoyment out of them in terms of references to other Zeldas is spotting the references and seeing like, oh, like, here's this location on the map in Breath of the Wild, or here's, these races from other Zelda games all together here in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, or here's these Link to the Past locations here in Echoes of Wisdom. But it's never like, oh, these things are here, that means it has to be right in between these games. Like, it never feels like it needs to take that step. And I understand people do, and I respect the way people go about it, as Swack said, because the dedication to it is impressive. But I definitely think it's more enjoyable on a personal level to let it exist as something that kind of lets the connections exist, as opposed to the thread that holds it all together. So now that being said, I could say my thought process about the timeline of this game is I'm sure it's just somewhere after A Link Between Worlds, because it's, well, all those places in A Link Between Worlds from A Link to the Past were almost 1-to-1 in terms of their status, whereas now they're kind of destroyed. So I imagine that means it's, I don't know, instead of a few hundred years later, it's probably just a few thousand or something. But I did want to bring it because we talked about it a little bit. The idea of the Prime Energy and talking about the original Golden Goddesses and their role in it, and the fact that the word Triforce is never once mentioned in this entire game, I'm pretty sure, in a similar way to how it's never mentioned in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, etc. It's iconography, it's there, it's clearly present, but it's never by name. It takes me back to even like the oldest Zelda games, like the original ones, where yes, it's mentioned, but it's more so the power it represents instead of the name of it. And it kind of makes me think back to like the original Zelda and all. And it makes me wonder if, with now 3 games, if that's the direction Nintendo's trying to move in with it. While the Triforce is a very obvious, recognizable iconography, it's not by name something they want, they don't want it to be the MacGuffin by name. It's not your 7 Chaos Emeralds kind of thing. It's this, well, as they say, this prime energy, this thing of legend, this godly power of legend, instead of a physical identity, a physical entity or thing to obtain it, is more of a power.
Well said, yeah, and I do think it serves that role while still like fitting with what was like established before. Like, I believe past games have referred to the Triforce as like the source of Hyrule's providence, and even we see in A Link Between Worlds, which you mentioned, like with what the effects of like not having a Triforce for the world, how that ends up with Lorule's version of it having been destroyed. Yeah, it like a prime energy is an apt way to describe it still. But it is, yeah, that is interesting that they never actually call it the Triforce, despite the fact that it is the Triforce. So,
yep.
Yeah.
It almost makes it feel like the name itself was lost to time, lost to legend kind of thing. At least that's how I kind of interpret it. Like, with now 3 games where they choose not to name it, 2 of which are connected, 1 isn't, it does feel like they're letting these games are far enough off that the name itself is lost to legend. Although I do feel like the gods probably should have said it by name when talking to Zelda, but there's something fitting and comforting about how they stick to the legend that Zelda knows that her father told her. They identify her as the priestess, and they use the term of the prime energy. They're not confusing her with all these extra things. Oh, well, here's what you heard, but here's what it actually is. Like, they're not doing that. They're building off of what she was told.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time that the name of the Triforce has kind of been lost to time in the series as well. So yeah, very interesting. Or even just kind of been kept secret. Even back to Skyward Sword, it was kind of a hush-hush subject, right? So yeah, interesting. Well, I've always been a big most of my channel stuff is not lore or timeline related, but I have been a big proponent of a particular timeline theory since about 2016 when I worked at the website Zelda Informer. Also, this is just funny, the Prime Energy drink. But
I'm sorry, I couldn't not think of it.
Sorry. I forget my train of thought. Oh boy. Yes, so in 2016 when I was at Zelda Informer, I made a video about what I called at the time the Dragon Break theory, but it was essentially the timeline convergence, and this was pre Breath of the Wild, obviously. But I have kind of like felt like that it's like a nice clean way of just kind of like being like, yeah, it all happened, convergence happened, now we can move on with our lives and then just enjoy Breath of the Wild and it has all these references. But I brought up KT's video earlier because of that sort of like point of convergence always having been ambiguous. And there's a moment at the very end of the game where I feel like almost maybe there's a chance that you know, that moment fits the bill. It could be that point, and it would be a way to just kind of clean things up, basically, and kind of put it to rest. And I'm just looking at
Wait,
this
what was the
post.
scene you're talking about?
The scene is, again, this is real rabbit hole stuff. So
Let's go.
Null opens a rift that swallows all of Hyrule, basically, and then you kick his ass with the help of Link, who, by the way, is an absolute unit in this game, and I feel like they really did Link justice for a game where you don't play as Link. I appreciated that, without ever like making you feel useless at the same time. So, you know, being Zelda wasn't overshadowed by how cool Link was, if that makes sense. But then, after the final battle, basically, it seems like Tri uses the Triforce to mend the rifts that have just sprawled open across Hyrule, and it restores everything. And who knows if Tri understands like the sort of rules of how to use the Triforce, but there's a part of me that's like, what if in that moment Tri mended more than just the rifts and just stitched reality back together, including those timelines? It's a big what if moment. Who knows? It's probably not that, but you know, I can't help but think about it. So
I like it. Tinfoil hat. I'm all in.
Yes.
Yeah, I like
It's
that. That's
totally
fun.
my tinfoil hat thing. And I'm not so married to the idea that if it was disproven, or someone wrote me a paragraph in the comments, or even if you guys had something to say about it, that I would be like choked about it. But it's a nice little thing to think about, I think.
Yes, Tri's actions created the wild era.
Yeah, basically. And allowed that sort of convergence to take place. Yeah.
Alternatively, there's a theory going around on Reddit and stuff, like perhaps the reason Lorule's falling apart is because of the Null.
Maybe like without that Triforce to sort of contain him, and so he's just like swallowing up Lorule. Now that's an interesting thought, because also in Lorule you have that scene in A Link Between Worlds where Yuga like resurrects Ganon or whatever, but that happens in Lorule, where Ganon was never in Lorule. So like you have to wonder if that's like a rift he's opened up. It kind of looks like a rift, actually.
I literally started thinking about that during this discussion of how every instance of Ganon we see in this game is an echo of Ganon, which means Null had to at some point have encountered Ganon to create an echo of Ganon. So is the void just where Ganon gets sealed to and just stuck endlessly floating around there?
I just sent you guys a screenshot here, but this is like Ganon's resurrection in A Link Between Worlds, and I just look at this, I'm like, that looks like a rift to me. Like, you know, I don't know, but
You're not necessarily wrong.
It's very reminiscent.
it's very rifty.
You're not wrong. It's very rifty.
There is one horrifying thought now, that if you can create echoes, oh god, the fact you don't now know how many previous villains or monsters might have been echoes.
That's true.
That's true. What if every time you walked out of a room and enemies respawned?
Oh, there's
It's
no,
actually
we
Echo.
can't be retroactive with this. Please. I'll never trust anything again.
I mean,
Oh my God.
this could also be how they explain just constant resurrections of Ganon. Maybe he's not actually resurrected each time. It's just a new echo is created.
Or alternatively, he could have been the possible origin of stuff like Demise and demons and stuff.
That's a good point too, because like Demise's existence sort of like recontextualize the origins of Ganondorf. So this could recontextualize even like taking it a layer further back. Yeah.
Mhm.
Makes you wonder. But I don't know. Like, you know, it's just fun to think about.
I have one fun, quick thing to ask you guys. It's like a fun, like, question that's borderline theory. If the entire premise of this game is echoes and creating echoes, which are more or less creating clones. If the way rifts are restored is through the power of echoes, are they not just actually cloning everything that was lost?
That's what I think.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Because like, you fix the rift over like the first dungeon, for example. If you go back to that spot in Hyrule, like you can still go back to the dungeon in the still world. So it's like still there. They just like copy pasted it back into Hyrule.
And then only people restored by Tri's power can see Tri. Possibly because they exist because of Tri's power.
Right, this is like if your molecules are broken down by a transporter, are you still the same person on the other side?
I literally explained this theory to a friend with the exact same premise of using teleportation. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll probably do a video on that in the next couple of weeks.
I had a lot of questions about what's the deal, what's the rules with the rifts, and how you're changed when you come out. Like, it seemed like a lot of people were really messed up when they came out of the rifts. And also, if you go back into the still world, like, they're still there. And I mean, I know that's probably just not updating the map or whatever, but there's like spooky implications there of the original still lost in the void, and everything else on the outside is a copy, and that's why they can't remember things. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Spooky.
Spookier than I thought. What the heck? Oh no.
Now, I might have to double check this. I think that the landscapes stay there, but like characters don't if you go back. I might be wrong about this, but I think that's the
I
case.
vaguely think they go away, yeah.
Check. I thought I saw someone, but I could be wrong.
But yeah, you know what? I have to double check on that. Because yeah, if the characters are still floating around in the still world, then that's got some dark implications. Like if they're just really like clones, basically. Is Link a clone? You know? No, not
At the same time, though, if they're not there, that's also got bad implications.
Just as like a closing topic, because I feel like we were all very positive about the game, but potential ways that we would like improve the game, like even if it's just a weird tiny nitpick, what would that be going forward? Like it's just a lesson for the next Zelda game to take forward. And I know this is a weird one, but mine is that the dungeon maps are too zoomed in. I just want to zoom out some more. But I'd love to hear what you guys think.
I think the obvious one is probably the fact the echoes are still one giant line unless you go to a grid in which it pauses the game. It's really awkward because we've seen this in 3 games now. Breath of the Wild did it for weapons, Tears of the Kingdom did it for materials, and now this game uses it for echoes. And every game, the list just gets longer and longer and longer. And it's like, do they not see how much scrolling these games require us to do? It's like, you'd think after 3 games, I'd think this is not working. It's a bad UI design decision.
Yeah, I did find myself just using the pause menu a lot after a certain point because it took so long to scroll through the quick menu. Unless I know I had used it recently. So, oops. But I mean, this is something I said with Tears of the Kingdom as well. Is like I just want to be able to set favorites as well.
Yeah.
I mean, auto build could do that. Why can't this menu and Tears of the Kingdom's materials do that?
I agree totally.
Yeah, no, Nintendo has this long-running fear of hotbars in any form that I will never understand for as long as I live. And if any game would have been massively improved by a hotbar you can assign by your own, it would have been Echoes of Wisdom. You know, I found a way around it by picking the echoes that I really liked and just spam summoning them over and over and over again. Like, I really like the Wolfo, so it's probably my most used enemy echo.
Nice.
So
Good.
I just sat there and spammed the Wolfo summon like 100 times until it jumped up into the first 6 of my most used echoes. That made using ones that I actually want really easy, but I shouldn't have to do that. You know, it's very silly that I have to find workarounds to something as simple as make a hotbar that triggers when you click one of the sticks in. Like, it would have been trivially easy for them to do so, but Nintendo just has an aversion to that kind of thing for reasons I will never understand.
I'm now trying to imagine it like literally the hotbar from Minecraft, just like stuck on the bottom of the screen. Literally, I think literally that would work.
Absolutely, it would.
Or even there's unused real estate on the controller. Like both the L button and the D-pad can be used to access the menu. I feel like we don't need that redundancy when one of those buttons could be used for something else, or even just assigning multiple echoes to buttons like we've had with item slots in other 3D Zelda games. But, you know, we could probably go on all day about inventory management or UI stuff.
As Bill touched on earlier, there's quite a few times that it feels like a few quality of life features haven't really been included, things like mini games and dialogue. So it's just like there's like if you fail a mini game, just go back through the whole thing from the beginning, whereas you could just have a retry option. Like say horse racing. It's like why do you start from the beginning? Why can't we just retry mid-race?
That's a good point, just to avoid that sort of redundancy, I guess, right?
Yeah. It feels a bit like a lot of the time, like Nintendo just has this problem, I think, in a lot of games. It's just like they don't seem to realize how much their interactions can add up on repeated playthroughs and attempts. On a slightly more critical note, I guess I might be only one thinks this, but sometimes it can feel like you're kind of a bit too passive in this game. Like sometimes you can just be waiting for your minions to basically fight everyone.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the time, like in a boss battle, you can kind of just be like, you can just be there in the corner or running around like a lunatic where your minions just beat the hell out of things. Sometimes I'm not sure that's always the best decision, because it's like, especially like in the final one where it's like, it's an amazing boss battle, amazing music, great, it looks really good, etc. But because you give Link all the equipment, you are quite literally a support character for the whole fight. Maybe
This actually plays into like different play styles a bit. But I always found that in scenarios like that, that's when like a bind would come in handy. And that went for the final battle too, where maybe Link wasn't doing, or the echoes weren't doing what I wanted them to exactly. So I'd end up like grabbing an enemy with bind and dragging them over to like, or grabbing one of Null's arms and I would drag it to Link and then Link would attack it.
And you can do that? That's awesome.
That ended up, I guess maybe because that's just how I was like playing, I felt very involved still. But I guess it does depend on how you play the game too, right?
I feel like my problem is I'm the kind of person who will optimize the fun out of it sometimes, so it can be very easy if there's a very safe way to fight, to take that safe way to fight.
I will say I make a lot of decisions in games based on what I feel is just like cool, like even just an outfit decision. I'm like, well, this has better defense, but this shirt looks cooler.
Yeah,
I do get that part. I do try to make Link look good in the games as well as actually wear decent armor. Otherwise, it feels kind of like you don't want to make it too mismatched in those last few games. It just feels really ugly.
Yeah, that's fair.
On a last note, I guess I don't like to say this. I feel like a lot of people probably enjoy it more, but stealth sections are just I just don't really enjoy that much in Zelda games. I feel like they kind of did a few too many in this one. For me, stealth sections in games, I feel they missed the mark a lot because they have this idea, don't get spotted, don't get caught, and I feel like within proper stealth games up here like Metal Gear or Hitman or Splinter Cell, whatever, it's like you get the chance to kill or hide your enemies or take them out some other way rather than just having to avoid being seen or caught. There's not just instant fail state.
I will say, like, I don't know if you guys played Plucky Squire, which came out recently as well. I loved that game, but I didn't like the stealth sections in that game for those same reasons. It's like you make one slip up and then you're zipped into like basically a cutscene of you dying and then it plops you back. And I was like, oh, dang, like at least I'd like to be able to run a little bit. Whereas I felt in Echoes, for the most part with the stealth sections, there was one in the Deku lockup this was not the case, but then in all the other stealth sections I felt like there was a lot of different ways to approach it. And I remember I was at PAX West recently and Tris was there. I don't know if anyone else was at PAX or got to play that demo that was there, because the demo was basically just that stealth section. But one thing that really stood out to me was actually looking around and seeing different ways that people were doing stuff. And so like I opted for a pretty straightforward stealth approach because I guess I'm not that creative. But then I saw someone else like literally spawn boxes to like trap guards into a certain area and then they could just run by without any issue. And I saw people like hopping around in the pots, and so I was like kind of struck by that, like, okay, like this is a stealth section but you can be pretty strategic about it. That kind of got reinforced when I was doing there's a side quest in the Gerudo town where there's a stealth section that's totally optional, but because of the way you can kind of just like play around with different echoes and do things, you can do a lot of fun things with it. And I guess it feels a little less passive, but again, this is also a taste thing as well. But just to give a different perspective, I guess, on it. Not to say that how you feel is not legit.
And then there's a speedrun one, which is literally just bolt full speed and jumping over everything.
If it works, right? It works.
Sure enough.
I did appreciate, unlike Plucky Squire, that they do have to catch you, and if you manage to outrun them, then that works. Again, Plucky Squire, I loved everything about the game except for those stealth sections. So
I feel like it's one of these things where, like, I feel like in the coming months, I'll probably have more that come to mind. Because right now, I'm definitely still in sort of like the rose-tinted glasses feeling, where I think everything about the game's perfect.
mm-hmm.
And I definitely had that with Tears of the Kingdom as well, which a lot of things have changed since then. But I think the only thing that really jumps out to mind is, I mean, it's already been said, but I just wish we could favorite echoes. It was so annoying, especially when you're in the middle of a boss fight or in the middle of like a really difficult puzzle and you're just messing around trying to get the right echo, when in reality it could be one that you use all the time. It's just you can't find it because there's no way to just select certain ones that you use all the time. At the end of the day, multiple things will work for the same puzzle or even fight, but you have your preferences. So it was a little bit annoying to have to scatter through it. I mean, you got used to it, but I would have preferred if you could just select some favorites. It would have made things a little bit more smooth. But yeah, I feel like right now I don't really have much to complain about, but I'm sure that will change in the coming months when you know, you start to process things a little bit more. I'm still on a very big high from the game right now because it was just so good. But yeah, that's the only thing that really jumps to mind for me.
My issues with the game, I would say, are pretty nitpicky. Overall, I loved it, but one thing that kind of popped out to me was some of the endings of some of the subplots of the story fell a little bit flat to me. Like, one example was Kande's brother, not being the boss of the temple was kind of a weird twist. But then to not see him come back in the story at all, minus the end credit shot, was kind of a letdown. I was sort of waiting for the happy reunion. And then I was also convinced that the Zora story was going to end with them falling in love and establishing the River Sea Zora alliance we see in Tears of the Kingdom. Especially with the follow-up quests for both of those stories, which both felt like they were leading in that direction again. So I felt maybe that's kind of like the corny ending that I wanted, but it felt a little bit lacking. And then the only other thing is that the timing overall felt a little bit weird to me. Like, the automatons came too late in the game for me to bother using them. And there were a lot of other echoes that I didn't really have that much opportunity to use because maybe I was too set in my ways with echoes I'd established for most of the game. So it seemed like I needed maybe more content kind of like backloaded in the game versus front loaded so that I could have more opportunities to play with like the full scope of the echoes that we unlocked. But I don't know, maybe I'll just invent things for myself to do around the land that isn't tied to a quest.
I fully agree. Actually, do you know when the first time I used an automaton was fighting Null in the final boss fight? Like,
what does this do?
Yeah, same.
About it. I mean, it was a fun time. I don't have too many complaints.
Fair enough.
So y'all are better than me. I didn't use automatons one time, and I think this might be sacrilege, but if they would have tinkered or refined the ecosystem a little more, automatons and sword fighter mode would not have to be in there. Which I like sword fighter mode, but I don't know if they could have worked a way around it. And then the other thing, I will also, I'm putting a video out on this sometime soon, so I don't want to get too deep into it. It's not only the scrolling menus, it's just how often you have to pause in these last 3 Zelda games. There's just so much pausing. Yeah. So that's something I think Nintendo seriously needs to take a look at in terms of improvements moving forward. But if I could add one thing to this game, and we were talking about how the 2D side-scrolling sections felt way more integrated in this game as opposed to previous games, and I think that is definitely true when in the final boss fight you get one. But on that same note, the game starts with us being Link, and then we never get to interact with that mechanic again. And the thing was, at the end of the game was the perfect opportunity to have us be able to switch between Zelda and Link. I don't know if anyone's ever played Eastward, but that's sort of a mechanic in that game that makes for really interesting puzzles. And it also would have made a dungeon that may have been the most unique dungeon in Zelda because you play it as Zelda and Link. But that might just be a pipe dream on my end.
Oh no, you've just given me a brainwave with that. That's a good.
Yeah.
That would have been very cool.
You're right. I felt the same.
Because there's
the thing is, they set it up. They set it up at the very beginning.
And then there's rooms like they split off, and Link's in like one room, and you're in the other. And there's one puzzle where you have to use bind on Link.
This right. You can use echoes too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true.
Wait, you have to use blind for that?
Or that's
you
how I
forget?
did
That
it.
makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I set echoes for him to be able to climb up.
Okay, that worked. Well, maybe. Well, okay, that just goes to show again, like that. There's many different ways to do these things.
I think a dungeon based around that one puzzle, but a dungeon's worth of puzzles would have been cool.
Oh, you're so right. And now I really want that because like I love. Well, like again, I don't want to like take away from like this is Zelda's game, right? And I don't want to like undermine that. But I do think like a tag team mechanic between the two for a finale wouldn't necessarily undermine that. It could be very cool, and it basically would be a stand-in for sword fighter mode, right? My only concern, like if you would get into that null boss fight and just play only as Link then, because you're armed.
Yeah, or maybe it gets to that point and then you can't switch.
Okay, so you would propose you do the dungeon being able to switch between them, and then you get into the boss fight, and then it's still Zelda, or you're back to not switching.
Yeah, I think you can make it work where, like you were saying, where Link is absolutely dieseled in this game. He's different than Zelda, but both are integral. And you could do the same thing where when you're Link, what Zelda does is Zelda. It's different from Link, but it doesn't take away from him. And so when they're separate, they're not more or less than, even though, it is Zelda's game. I just think it's weird that you would have that bit at the beginning and then not follow through with it at the end.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could argue that sword fighter form, like it's like a tease for sword fighter form, but I mean, it is and it isn't.
Before we met Link, I like how he was characterized in the game too, where he was just like this dude who wasn't anybody, but he was doing the right thing for the people who needed it.
And his whole like relationship with Blueberry, I think, actually stuck out to me, which I meant to mention earlier and I didn't.
Yeah, he gets his own impa basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm pretty similar to Little Bean Green on the last point. I totally thought they were setting up a Zelda and Link dungeon. The only thing that I'd add to that is I think they could make Zelda and Link playable in the final boss fight. So he has around three, maybe 4 phases. I don't know. It would require some tinkering, but you could play through the first phase as Zelda with Link just as Zelda alone. Second, you could play as Link. Third, you could play as both of them, and you could swap off, just like Sword Fighter mode. The other becomes a companion, kind of like being able to swap between Link and Phantom Zelda in Spirit Tracks. That's what I would do to fix that, because I just love that idea so much. But again, pipe dream territory. The one thing that stuck out to me, well, there's 2 things, but one's bigger. I was a little disappointed by how cumbersome some of the regional quests were to finish. The barrier to entry to enter a dungeon. I'm definitely biased toward how the original Legend of Zelda did some things where you can just stumble upon some of them. I don't think I want to do it with no lead up, but I do think that a lot of these really cool narratives that are being spun through the regional quests sometimes didn't have the mechanical meat to uphold them, which could sometimes kind of falter into like Pokemon territory, where it's a lot of dialogue back to back and it gets kind of tiring. That's my only real thing that I think they should improve. Again, just like Adam said, I am totally in the honeymoon phase with the game and I want to be in bliss for as long as I can. But the other smaller thing is I love how they did the rifts, but I think there are too many of them because they adapted the terminal system pretty well from the Divine Beasts and Tears of the Kingdoms dungeons into a smaller kind of side objective with the rifts. Some of them are necessary and some of them aren't. I didn't find that they were mechanically engaging enough to warrant how many there were. I think what came out of them when you like mended a rift was really cool. But I'd like to see a bit more of that, Eastern Temple type ambition in those rifts. Not something that actively annoyed me, but I could see some potential there. But beyond that, I think this game was just pretty remarkably polished.
So, I have one particular criticism, gripe, whatever you want to call it, with the game that I think is a larger issue with Nintendo in general, I'm kind of realizing. I don't think Zelda should have been a silent protagonist. I love that they went out of their way to explain why Link was, but it felt very out of character for Zelda to only have the implied speaking. I appreciate that, she wasn't completely mute in the sense that, like, they had the constantly implied conversation, but I didn't really like how anytime that happened, you either had Tri or some other character be like, oh, what's that? And they kind of just, rephrase what Zelda would have said, but as a question. I kind of feel like they shouldn't have shied away from having Zelda actually say some of these things. I think it would have helped separate her further from Link. But the reason why I say it's a larger Nintendo issue is because I think that happened with the Princess Peach Showtime as well, where Peach was the silent protagonist in her own game. Luigi tends to be a silent protagonist in his games. I think it's just for some reason they don't want their protagonists having dialogue when they're the star of their game, and I think that hurt Zelda's character a little bit, to me at least. I think I would have enjoyed her bond with Tri a little bit more, and her bond with like Impa and the King. While those are all good from the way they're displayed, I think I would have liked it even more if we get Zelda's comments on these, like Zelda actually saying something, Zelda befriending the Gerudo and the Zora, and having input and helping teach Tri these little lessons, instead of Tri kind of learning it, questioning it, looking at Zelda, and I guess getting some sort of confirmation from Zelda.
That's a good point. And I did notice it. There's only one instance where it actually bothered me, and that was again during like the ending of the game where Link and Zelda were together, and then I was like, these two characters are interacting, and the lack of dialogue, them just like kind of staring at each other for 3 seconds and then moving on.
Yeah.
That was the only time where I was like, this is a little awkward.
To me, it's the fact that they went out of their way to explain why Link was silent, but they didn't do it for Zelda, despite this being the only time she's ever really been a silent protagonist. It makes it not add up quite right, to me at least.
Though I did think at the very end it was very funny how then Link does speak, and everyone's like...
Everyone's shocked.
Everyone's shocked, yeah. I thought that was a nice little moment. So that was, yeah, like I said, I thought that was a nice moment. But yeah, there was some awkwardness with that, I think, that could have been mended by at least having one of them speak.
Yeah, like, it's not a case of I think it's like a bad decision on the game's part. It's more so just I think the game would have actually been a bit better if they let her speak. I think it only would have added to it.
And plus, you know, she's supposed to be this, she's the embodiment of wisdom, right? So I'd like to hear what she has to say sometimes, I guess, as well.
If the goddesses can speak, Zelda should be able to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
I did also really like that as well. Sorry, we were talking about things we would improve, but I did like that actually, that we got like, I think this is the first time that 3 golden goddesses actually have like dialogue.
It's so cool.
And I was, well, I'm pretty sure it's the first time at least, unless I'm forgetting something, so feel free to correct me. But I was like sitting on my couch when that happened, and I was like, I literally was like, holy shit, out loud. Like, and my wife's like, what? It was just like nothing's happening in your game.
I mean, it tracked really well with her character too, like being the priestess, and like Zelda in general. I feel like in the games is always communing with the goddess or goddesses. So yeah. I thought that made a lot of sense for her character, which was cool.
That's a good point too. Is I wonder if Link would have heard the goddesses speak if he was in that situation, and maybe we only got to hear them because it was Zelda.
Okay, I will give one more improvement, and it's far less egregious in this game, but in certain cutscenes, they still fade to black when things are happening.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yes.
That was a bummer.
The classic. The classic. It's so true.
We couldn't animate this character walking 3 feet. We just fade to black.
Even though they just walked up to you.
That drives me so insane from like an editing standpoint. There's nothing more I hate than when you're trying to use a cutscene and it fades to black for 5 seconds for absolutely no reason.
Yeah.
It's just one of those small things.
The other one is the frame rate. You know, I know as Nintendo fans, we're all a little sensitive about the topic of performance and stuff like that. And I understand people who don't have any problem with it and think it's silly that people do have a problem with it. But, you know, it's 2024, and I think it's a reasonable expectations for your games to run well on your console. And while Echoes of Wisdom was never egregious enough to take away from the experience for me, it was noticeable from the moment I turned the game on to the moment I finished, right? It was definitely worse in some areas than others, but it was noticeable through the entire time. And I just think that kind of thing is... it's worse with the Switch because, you know, Breath of the Wild was a launch title and it, from the get-go, had performance issues. Whereas most consoles, it's the end of cycle games that start having the problems, right? But with the Switch, it was right from the get-go. It was like, oh, okay, we're going to be dealing with some issues with this one. And then that remained true through the entire life cycle. So I don't know if it's a Grezzo thing or if it's, I don't think so, because again, even Nintendo produced games have issues, but of course Link's Awakening had issues too. I really hope that with the next console, it is either powerful enough that Nintendo can run their own games without significant frame rate slowdown, or they design their games with a small enough scope that they can run properly without significant issue. Again, not a game changer for me, but it was pretty annoying. The last thing I would say is I was kind of underwhelmed. We mentioned this earlier, but I was kind of underwhelmed by the music. Music is one of the biggest parts of Zelda games for me. So it's like Age of Calamity has great music, but Echoes of Wisdom is an average tier music in terms of overall gaming, and that's disappointing for a Zelda game, which is just a testament to how good Zelda music is generally, right?
100% agree with you there on that.
Yeah, exactly. There was a couple tracks that were really, really good, but I'm probably not going to be adding many Echoes of Wisdom songs to my video game playlist, which is probably 70% comprised of Zelda music, and I think that's a bit of a shame. But I think that's kind of it. Everything else, I really didn't have a problem. There's little things like, again, I wish the difficulty just took one tiny little step further, but it's not big enough for me to consider it a flaw.
Given the music's not seen as the highlight, I mean, what songs would you say are good in this game?
I will shill for that Elden Temple music all day, but
that one is very good.
And I actually did like the Still World music in general because I thought it was very like ethereal feeling, and it fit really well.
Yeah, the Still World's one of my favorites.
I can't remember exactly where, but there's like a rendition of Zelda's Lullaby that plays, I think, somewhere around Southern.
It's in it's in the Hyrule Field theme after clearing Hyrule Castle.
Yes.
That was fantastic. It was it was goated with the sauce.
Yeah, that one's great.
Yeah,
I would say
I think just the Hyrule Field theme in general, just like at first I thought it would get kind of annoying, but I realized like halfway through the pipes are so good, especially when they just build up and then hit their peak, and then they I don't even know how to explain it. I'm not Zelda music theory, but oh my gosh, I think it's one of the best Hyrule Field themes we had in years, and it's all because of those wind instruments.
Yeah, that's fair. I actually do quite like the overworld theme. This is like, maybe I'm a little more forgiving about the music than Nehru, but like generally Zelda music is a 10 out of 10. I guess a lot of Echo's music was like an 8 out of 10 for me, which is like just good music, I thought. But maybe like other Zelda music is better. That's fine too. but I don't know. I think overall I didn't feel too disappointed about the soundtrack, but there are some tracks that were like a little meh as well.
I just think about games like Age of Calamity was the most recent one, where the music is so good that there are individual songs that I listen to like apart from my playlist, because it's just like, wow, I really need to listen to the meditations theme right now, or wow, I absolutely have to listen to the main menu music. There's not a choice in the matter, or like there is a burgeoning feeling in my soul to listen to all of the medley music when you're saving the champions, and like I don't think any of that's going to happen with Echoes of Wisdom aside from a couple songs, whereas normally with Zelda games, even Zelda games I don't like that much, like Twilight Princess, there are still like tons of Twilight Princess songs that I absolutely adore, right? And that I want to listen to all the time. And again, maybe my opinion will change over time, but with Echoes of Wisdom, the music is good. None of it's bad. There's not a single song I found annoying or anything like that. Not like Dancing Dragons. But it was...
Dancing Dragon Dungeon is unrivaled, though.
I'm used to Zelda music being peak, and when it isn't, I guess it's a little disappointing for me, and that's probably an unreasonable opinion to have.
No, that's fair. I will say though, like for every Dancing Dragon dungeon, there's a Poison Moth's lair. So
absolutely.
I guess that's true in every sense.
Yes.
One thing that I've been thinking about a lot as I've been seeing the public reaction, and I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on it. I don't necessarily think this is the case with the people here, because I think everyone here is fairly rational, but I think there are a lot of high emotions going on surrounding Tears of the Kingdom. Like, I think that's quite obvious. And I wonder how much of the intensely positive reaction we're seeing for Echoes of Wisdom is actually because of how good Echoes of Wisdom is, and how much of it is people being happy that it's not Tears of the Kingdom, and that it's quite far away from what we got, and if the opinion's going to change once there's some distance. Because what it reminds me a lot of is what's the horrible 9th Star Wars movie called? Rise of Skywalker?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, when that movie first came out, there was a lot of positive buzz from the people in my circle. I didn't pay too much attention to the internet reaction, but
Mine too.
in my personal circle, there was a huge amount of positive buzz around it, and most of the reason people were happy is because it essentially exists to retcon The Last Jedi, which upset people, right? But then when time passed and things cooled and emotions dropped a little bit, all of a sudden these same people kind of realized that it's not a good movie. It's actually quite horrible, and their opinion likewise changed because they were off that high of it reversing the movie that really bothered them. And I see a lot of that going on in Tears of the Kingdom, where there are people who are very notoriously vocal against it, constantly talking about its flaws, who are talking about how good Echoes of Wisdom is, but they're never talking about it on its own merit. They're primarily saying Echoes of Wisdom does this in opposition to Tears of the Kingdom, and I really like that. And I wonder how feelings are going to be about Echoes of Wisdom 5 years from now, when it's decoupled from the release of Tears of the Kingdom.
Right.
That's a super good question. I think that's really
I love
intelligent
that
to think
topic.
about.
I will say outright, as a Tears of the Kingdom enjoyer, that for me, that's not the case. I just happen to like both of these games, basically.
Yeah, same.
Same.
But that's me. But I do want to hear everyone's take on that. Absolutely.
I feel like, to a degree, people have said that's like almost a cycle for Zelda games for years. So it's like you see a game come out, initially people are super excited about it, think it's a huge improvement over the last one, best game ever. Then a couple of years later, they get to see all the negativity creeps up. People start talking about the next one as being much better than the last game, how this game's a disaster. And then 10 years later, and then first game's back as a classic and something like that, I guess. Is it like Zelda cycle again?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, but that's why I'm sort of curious about how people are going to feel about it like 5 years from now or whatever, because you have a title like Wind Waker, where it was fairly reviled when it first came out, right? And then 5 years later, all of a sudden it's in the running for one of the greatest Zelda games of all time, and then it's to the point where its HD version outsells Twilight Princess's HD version, right? And like it had this huge redemption, whereas it was so hated. And then you have a game like Skyward Sword, where it was reviled when it came out, and it is still wrongfully, I should say, somewhat reviled by a decent chunk of the community. So it's like I do think the Zelda cycle is real in the sense of initial reactions, but I don't think every game then goes on to later be looked down upon in the way that people say that the Zelda cycle happens. I do think it's real for initial reactions, but that's why I'm kind of interested in how people are going to feel 5 years out.
Based on what I've seen with Nintendo games on Switch, it feels like you see a huge ton of hype at first, like the best game ever, best in the series, amazing classic, whatever. Like, I mean, I think you saw that as well. I think to the degree of Odyssey and Wonder and various other games, as well as stuff like Tears of Kingdom and whatnot. So in that sense, it's not just Zelda gets that kind of reaction. But I feel that then after a few months, it feels you get a lot more videos popping up saying a critical review of this game that's so beloved about why it's not actually that great at all to begin with. I don't know, I feel like in a couple of months or a year, we're going to see at least one long-form 2-hour video about why Echoes of Wisdom did disaster or something, and in a couple of years later, then people will be back to being more positive.
My wild prediction is that those who despise Tears of the Kingdom, being someone who I myself don't hate Tears of the Kingdom, but it's a 7 out of 10 for me. You know, it's above average, but it's not my favorite Zelda game. I think those who really hated Tears of the Kingdom, it's possible that in the future, the more and more Echoes of Wisdom is culturally disconnected from Tears of the Kingdom, it's possible that those same people who dislike Tears of the Kingdom but loved Echoes for the traditional elements it brought back will start disliking Echoes for how similar it was to Tears and what it brought over. Because there's a lot of people who really didn't like Breath of the Wild and really didn't like that there weren't very traditional elements in it, such as themed dungeons, and just adored Tears of the Kingdom when it came out because it had themed dungeons, and had like more nods to traditionalistic Zelda lore, like a Ganondorf, like an actual Ganondorf, you know, reference to at least an imprisoning war, sages, all that. And the same people, you know, relatively speaking, kind of took a turn maybe a year after release and realized that, at least in their view, the dungeons being themed were like window dressing, and they're actually worse than Divine Beasts or XYZ. I'm not claiming to have those opinions, but that's what I've seen. So they then started disliking Tears of the Kingdom because they saw so much of Breath of the Wild in it, which they already didn't like. And they thought that it was fixed when it came out because of how the game was presented. And then they realized Tears is a lot more like Breath of the Wild than they originally thought. And I think the same thing could happen with Echoes, where people realize it's more like Tears than they originally thought.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on the money there. I even saw it play out with Breath of the Wild. Like, I have a funny, almost like time capsule on my YouTube channel because I did like a Let's Argue type video ripping off Anthony Fantano, where I just argued against people's hot takes. And one of the hot takes was that Breath of the Wild had a bad story. And that was a very, very, very common thing back when Breath of the Wild was the only game out, right? And like, I got it in my comments all the time and I argued against it because I don't think I think the active story that is told in the game is bad, but I think if you include all the memories and stuff, Breath of the Wild has a very lovely story. But that was really a really common complaint back then, is that it has a bad story, and they were comparing to the linear games. And now with Tears of the Kingdom, you have people talking about how they wish the story was more like Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the Wild didn't have massive plot holes or whatever, right? It didn't neuter its plot twist like Tears of the Kingdom, or whatever the criticisms are, right? I don't really agree with any of that, but that's just what the arguments are, right? Before I talked about how, like, with the timeline, the two different groups who hated the timeline before and then now hate that they don't follow the timeline are two different groups. In this case, it's the exact same people, both some of our peers and people I recognize in the comments who hated Breath of the Wild story, but now reference back to it like it's the standard that should be set, and Tears of the Kingdom is bad for not following it. And it's the exact same people. And those people are now on to Echoes of Wisdom, talking about how fantastic Echoes of Wisdom is because of this, this, and this. And I'm like, is it going to be the case where these same people, when the next game comes out, all of a sudden Echoes of Wisdom is being referenced? You know, it's like, I don't know. I don't even know if I have a point here. I might just be complaining about the community.
The Zelda cycle is all about complaining about the past game and using that to build onto the positives of the new game, despite not really saying anything to let it stand on its own.
And then when the new game comes out, it's reversed, and you use the old game as a reason to crap on the new one.
It's insightful. I agree. That's totally right.
I guess I should remind people watching that if you're like listening to this and you're like, I don't do that, there's a possibility we're not talking about you then.
I'm talking. I am entirely talking about my own wretched audience. You were all fine.
Yeah.
Ouch! That's harsh to the audience. Awesome.
Yeah, and of course, you know, oftentimes we'll speak in generalizations of like, oh, Zelda fans will do this or whatever. And of course, we don't mean that like every single person who's bought a Zelda game does that, like, so don't worry.
Yeah, it's the vocal minority.
That's exactly what I mean. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, except for Nehru, so just go subscribe to him and then hate comment on all his videos.
I hate you all.
Part of this could just be driven by just social media and YouTube and internet popularity, because let's be real here, you can get a lot of views just for being extremely cynical about things, being negative about beloved games and franchises.
It's true.
That's true.
I mean, that probably is an element that feeds into, you know, what is called the Zelda cycle. You know, certain systems, like in YouTube, for the amazing platform it is, can profit off of that negativity, whether the creator has positive or negative intentions.
I think there is something to be said, just as creators, that we sometimes underestimate sort of the sway that sometimes we can have over audiences. Because I think for me, not to be full of myself, but I think if I were to make a long enough video that eloquently explains like that something sucked, and I explained it in an articulate, well enough way, even if it actually didn't suck, I think I could convince people that it does. Do you know what I mean?
Honestly, yes, totally. I know what you mean.
I love Tears of the Kingdom. It's like my 6th favorite Zelda game, and Skitty's video almost had me convinced I hate it.
It was so
Oh my
good.
God.
It was such a good video.
I wasn't gonna mention names, but yeah, Skitty, I really like them, and I think that they're a great person. I don't agree with all of their takes, although we have
It was
a
a
lot
fantastic video.
but I do think that they made a very well produced, very fantastic video, and they're a good person, and actually their opinions about Link's Awakening and mine are very aligned. So we do mostly just talk about that when we.
I'd also say too, it's not always about the points you're making, but how you're making the points.
Yes.
And so I think it's a lot easier to channel some negativity and put that into a passion when you're making a video. And I think if we're all aware that the Zelda cycle exists, that it's fine to defend the old things that you still like and to put up some resistance when a new game comes along and people start putting down the old games and saying things suck.
I think as humans, we also just have a penchant towards negativity, even if we don't realize it.
Yeah.
Like I was writing a review of an indie game for Boss Rush recently, and I sent it to my editor, and I gave it a 3.5 because I liked it. I just didn't think it was a great game, so I gave it a 3.5. And his feedback was like, the way you wrote about this game, I would not give it any higher than 2 stars. You were very scathing. And I was like, oh. And I went back and read it, and I was like, yeah, I mentioned the things I like, and I just glossed over them entirely, and then I expounded on the things that bothered me, because I think that's just tendency we have as humans, right? Is the things we like, and the things we don't like, we want to complain about.
For sure. And that's sort of the curse of the Zelda games, is that normally they're so good that the things that are glaring issues become more glaring, and so you skip over all those good points to get to the glaring ones.
I think there could also be like a sense of like feeling like you need to justify why something you don't like it, and then it can come across because, well, maybe for me at least, it can come across that like maybe just because I'm over explaining it, that it sends this message that I dislike it more than I actually do. Or I might like just kind of dislike it, but then I spend so much time talking about why that is that people are like, wow, he really hates those side-scrolling sections in Link's Awakening. They're the worst sin.
You really do, though.
I think that's even the case with me talking about the music today. Like, I don't hate the music, but I think it probably came off as though I do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, as like writers in the YouTube space, often to kind of, I guess, play angel's advocate, I feel like problems can be a lot more fun to untangle the metaphorical knot of than praising why something did something so well. Because there's an art in you explaining how they could improve. So it can be a lot more fun to write about how something could be improved, because you kind of get to play, like, in a very nebulous sense, you get to play game designer and think, hey, maybe, or more like you get to play like visionary, and you get to think, this could be cool, that could be cool, and because I see flaws in this, it makes me excited to think about how they could do it better in the next game. So, and I think honestly, a lot of the Zelda community is just doing that. A lot of the Zelda YouTubers have pretty well-adjusted opinions and just find it very enjoyable to untangle that knot of how can we fix something that I didn't enjoy, instead of I only want to talk about how bad this game is because I don't want you to enjoy it.
I mean, ultimately, we want the best Zelda games all the time. And so talking about the things that can be improved is a mechanism for getting there, ideally.
That is worth noting. That, yeah, it does stem from the fact that we love these games, not from like a spiteful place.
I have one more question for Hyrule Gamer.
Yes, sir.
So in Echoes of Wisdom, you can go into water, grab a fish, and then pull it out of water. Does that count as fishing in Zelda?
Oh man, I was hoping there was a little fishing rod we could use, but I'm gonna count it. I'm gonna count it as fishing.
Perfect.
I've done it in the game. I enjoyed it. I think that counts.
Fishing's back, baby.
All right.
It'll do.
Perfect. Well, 20 minutes somehow went by since I said that we should wrap this up. It happens every time I have one of these discussions. So we'll wrap this up, and I'll let everyone plug themselves before we call it a night. If you want to just tell us all your handles, I'll link everything, of course, in the description. And if there's a project you're working on that you're excited about and want to tease or share, you don't have to, then feel free to do that now as well.
Okay, I mean, I guess I run the Game Reinvented channel and website, which is probably linked in the description. I've currently for videos and stuff. Most of them are about glitches and bugs in games. I'm planning to look at some more varied essay videos, like some potential logical reasons why Tears of the Kingdom might have declined a bit popularity-wise. I've currently just reviewed Echoes of Wisdom and just started working on some Echoes of Wisdom videos, so I guess if you're more into that kind of game, there's stuff to check out. But yeah, it's been nice being here, so thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. It's good to have you. I think the only other time you were on the channel was pre-Tears of the Kingdom launch, so it's good to have you back on. Adam, if people don't know who Hyrule Gamer is somehow.
I'm honored to be considered like that. Yeah, you can find me at Hyrule Gamer. I'm pretty much everything. Working on some Echoes of Wisdom videos right now, but I'll probably be taking a few weeks just to knuckle down some ideas, and I've kind of dropped the whole weekly video thing. I'm just uploading. I'm just uploading when things are ready. So yeah, there'll be some Echoes of Wisdom lore videos in the works soon. So yeah, I'd look out for that.
I've got your video called "Why You Must Play Echoes of Wisdom." It's sitting at the top of my watch list. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm gonna. So I'm gonna. KT.
Yeah, I was so excited to talk to you guys, as this was really the first time I'd been able to unpack thoughts and feelings about the game. I haven't made really any videos since it came out, but this got me thinking for sure, so I'll probably have some unhinged theories coming soon. But yeah, thanks so much for organizing this and including me. This is also the first discussion thing I've ever done, and it was a lot of fun to talk with a bunch of other crazy Zelda people, so thanks.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And yeah, again, I'll reiterate, links are in the description. Are there anything specific you have in mind that you'll probably have coming out soon? Or
there are so many things I want to talk about in videos that I can't decide where to start, so I'll keep you posted.
That's fair. That is fair. I don't blame you. A Little Bean Green.
Little Bean Green, you'll only find me on YouTube because I'm an old man. There's a Discord in the works for anyone who's interested in that. Speaking of imagining things that aren't instead of talking about things you like that are, I have been in the process of making a conceptual Zelda game that is going very slowly and hoping to put out more videos on that soon. Echoes of Wisdom related videos also in the works. Like KT, this is the first one of these I had the pleasure of being involved in, and so it's fun to talk about something so fresh and in real time with a bunch of other folks. So I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we can do it again sometime when the next one drops with 5 months notice.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't do these too often, but I always have a blast when I do. And I highly recommend to everyone LBG's video on frogs.
Oh yeah, there's going to be another one. Another one's coming. More frog lore is dropped.
Good, because there's new frog stuff, I guess, right? Nehru.
So first of all, I'm going to shill a video on her behalf. You guys should go to Kokiri Theory's channel and watch her video on Studio Ghibli Connections to Zelda, because that's a great video.
Oh, thanks.
For my own channel, I am not as active as I should be. I have currently a video that I am very proud of, defending the storytelling of the Zelda series at large. Not really considering Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, but just defending the storytelling from the claim that Zelda stories have always been kind of bad. It's quite long, but I know a lot of people like that kind of thing. Coming up soon here, I have a review of Echoes of Wisdom that will be going live both on bossrush.net and in narrated form on the YouTube channel. And then I am also getting ready to release my first non-Zelda video, which is going to be a look at the 80s Dragon Ball games. If there are any Dragon Ball fans who like bad NES games watching this.
Love it. And yeah, that video that you mentioned about Zelda storytelling, I really enjoyed that one as well. So definitely recommend that one. Absolutely. And Swack, who has, by the way, I'll just mention real quick, a standout thumbnail style, just in general.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you can just find me at Swack. Nothing more than that. There's an exclamation mark at the end sometimes. I'm releasing weekly content that hopefully ranges from 10 minutes upward. I can't always do that though, especially during Echoes of Wisdom where I'm soaking it in. Something I haven't talked about on my channel yet, but is coming hopefully within the year, if not near January, is a full-length review of The Wind Waker, which I'm super excited for because I used to do pretty long game reviews when I wasn't venturing back into Zeldatube, and it's looking like it's going to be kind of feature length. So I'm super excited for that. That's pretty much about it, I'm going to say.
Sounds good. And I'll just go ahead and chill you and recommend Swack's video on Echoes of Wisdom Combat, which is very brief, and really just covers the first part of the game. But since we're talking Echoes of Wisdom anyways, it fits, I think. So, and Triss, last but not least.
You can find me on most platforms at ToonTriss. I've only really been able to stream the start of Echoes of Wisdom in terms of Zelda content on my channel, but I'm actually looking forward to trying to dive into like theories and lore videos and all that very, very soon. First time getting to actually talk with, I think, any of you guys in terms of Zelda content, so this was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and again, links in the description to everyone's channels, so please go and support these creators. They're all excellent. If they weren't, I wouldn't have them here. Not to say that the people I turned away, I actually did have to turn a couple people away because I was like, I have too many people now. But not to say they aren't excellent, but I do try and, bring together introspective and thoughtful people when I do these discussions. So, give them the watch. Go subscribe to their channels, and if you're here, I don't need to shill myself. You're already here. So the shilling happened at some point already. So, but thank you guys all for agreeing to this, especially on relatively short notice as far as like planning and all goes. Appreciate your grace and patience and cooperation and all of your insights.
If you're here from the front page, subscribe to Captain Bergerson.
Oh my gosh. Yes, and stick around for more dungeon-related content, I guess. Thank you all for watching as well, and a pre-recorded version of me will follow up with the Patreon slide. So I'm going to hit end record now. Bye-bye, everybody.
Farewell.
Maybe
Bye.
the
Thanks, y'all.
pre-recorded version of you is one of those Rift clones.
Ooh,
Oh
man.
my god. Oh my god.
I'm just saying.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Noel has replaced Captain Ferguson.
Oh
It
no.
came from the gap between dimensions.
I hope not. Thank you so much for watching. Special thanks goes out to my channel members here on YouTube, as well as my supporters on Patreon. So thank you to Greymage, Brenda, Tetra, Justin, Midnight Naomi, Bunny, Stefan, Avery, and their ATHDs, as well as all of the folks whose names you're seeing on screen right now. You guys are awesome. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.